there's a bigger issue than just corruption in Washington that we're dealing with here. The guy who is the top advisor to the President of the United States and is at every single one of these meetings, knowing exactly what the U.S. government is going to do in order to destabilize a region, overthrow a government. His brother is running the investment arm of BlackRock. We were literally funding so many different groups, and this is part of how U.S. companies run the world. ExxonMobil did not necessarily win by being the best oil company. ExxonMobil wins because the U.S. military goes in and invades Iraq and funds to take over Syria. It's the same thing with every multinational corporation. Like in this case, it's gross. It was actually a guy named George Foote. He is working with narco networks, Islamic terror groups, representing the U.S. companies who will immediately profiteer from us pumping up the international trade. 95% of Europe's opium comes from Afghanistan. And U.S. Institute of Peace is saying,
hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, no problem, but I'd really appreciate it if you would save it to your watch later playlist. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below. Thank you. Mike Mercedes-Benz in the building.
great to see you.
It's great to have you, man. Thanks for making this like last minute stop while you're in town.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. You got a cool joint here.
Thank you. Thank you. I have been seeing clips of you all over the internet. You've basically like owned my Twitter feed for the last 5-6 months. So obviously you've put your finger on some kind of pulse here.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to offer a framework for understanding the structure of American power, primarily through the lens of free speech and censorship issues. That was really remains my core focus. It was really the thing that drove me into this space. But what I found is in the process of telling the story of what's driving internet censorship, the forces behind it, the government forces, the NGOs, the private corporation sponsors, given that if something is being censored, especially by a government, it has geopolitical implications. There's something the government does not want to spread. You have to understand the censorship story, you need to understand how that government works, how it's structured, how it works with partners outside the government in order to trace the funding, in order to understand the motivations, in order to propose solutions that will actually work in taking it on. And I'm delighted to see that I think a lot of the policy proposals I've been putting forward have been taken up by the White House, taken up by Congress, and it's been really the thrill of a lifetime to see it all play out this way, but there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, it feels like it was years in the making, too. Like, everyone likes to say someone's here all of a sudden, and it's like, bro, I've been on this train.
You would not believe how much of that I get. And I've I used to respond to that stuff all the time. Like, oh, yeah. And at this point, it's just water off my back. But the fact is it was absolutely that. Like, this idea that I came out of nowhere is insane. Like, I gave up everything to do this. I give the analogy, if you ever seen Conan the Barbarian, the old one with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes. Yeah.
It starts off with him chained to the wheel of pain for 15 years. And that's how, according to the legend, that's how he gets so big, is that he's sold into slavery and he just pushes this wheel of pain. He just pushes a wheel around all day, every day. And that's what, the legend of Conan, that's what gives him his broad physique and, his toughness, is that wasn't some magical power. It was just being chained to this wheel of pain. And that's what it was for me. I was a corporate lawyer. I was not really a political guy. I fell into this rabbit hole around internet censorship. Free speech has just been always super important to me morally.
When did that happen, that rabbit hole, first time?
Well, the rabbit hole started really August 2016 was when it took over my life. I came across a bunch of at the time, people were trying to search for answers around what was causing internet censorship. And everyone was pointing at Mark Zuckerberg and saying Zuckerberg loves censorship, or Susan Wojcicki at YouTube, or Jack Dorsey at Twitter. And I never found that persuasive. Yeah. And I tried to search beyond that. And what I came across were basically government documents around the use of artificial intelligence to scan and ban keywords and scan and ban narratives that trend or that are, mis or disinformation or hate speech or really anything geopolitically sensitive. These were DARPA documents.
DARPA. You found DARPA.
Yeah.
You weren't in government yet at this
I wasn't
time.
even in
You're
I
a
wasn't in
corporate
government.
lawyer
I was a tech lawyer.
Whoa.
I was doing tech and private equity and hedge funds. That was my space.
What are you, Sherlock Holmes? How do you find DARPA documents? I need to know.
Well, I saw there was some mainstream reporting on the problems the content moderation ecosystem was experiencing, trying to deal with the Wack-a-Mole problem, which is what they called it, which was this idea that everything pre-2017, other than CP and spam, all content moderation was done manually by human reviewers and in response to things being manually flagged to them, either by their own team or usually when someone clicks the report this post or report this video, option on any social media site. And the problem was, in their view, there was so much stuff they had to censor. This was during the rise of Trump and Brexit and all these things that they were arguing would cause the end of the world, that there was no way to do that at the scale and as fast, as precise, and as comprehensive as was necessary through human means. And so there was focus at the time on repurposing a military technology that was created to do that at speed and scale to stop terrorism during the GWOT, the Global War on Terror era, and to use that for speech online against U.S. citizens and Trump supporters, Brexit supporters, anyone who wanted to voice an opinion against open borders or climate change or any number of hot button issues. And that terrified me in particular because I came of age as a sort of semi-competitive chess player during the Deep Blue Garry Kasparov era. And that was a really formative time in my life when that happened because it was clear to me as a kid that AI was going to take over the chess world and change it forever. And because even when I was 14, 15, 16, we were using chess engines to analyze games, and these engines were already better than the best guys at the club or the national master, tutor for the local chess community.
We're talking like the early 2000s here?
Yeah, like late 90s, early 2000s, because it was 2000 when Garry Kasparov lost to Deep Blue. And I remember in the run up to that, the adults in the chess world and my local club were saying, they were holding out hope. They were saying, the pure human spirit will prevail. And it was so obvious to me as a kid. It was really like the first time I can remember as a young person being like, holy, the adults are wrong on this one. They're right on everything else. I defer to, 40 and 50-year-olds on how to drive a car. And, I believe there's such a thing as taxes. And I don't know how to get from point A to point Z. But this thing,
Tech, shut the f up, boomer.
Yeah, right. It's like how can you not see this coming? And it was a very bittersweet I told you so afterwards because everybody was very depressed when Deep Blue won that match. And it wasn't depressing to me because I'd priced it in. Of course, no chance. If the little thing on my home computer is at an international master level, there's no way the best computers aren't better than a strong grandmaster. And so that left a pretty strong imprint on me. The AI's ability to completely outwit any human attempt to circumvent its brute force calculation ability. And when in 2016, when a lot of this was in commercial development for AI use to flag things online for takedowns of information, it was widely dismissed, I think, and laughed at by a lot of people in the Trump movement. But they were saying, oh, they'll say we can't say gay. We'll spell it G-H-E-Y. There was this, there's no stopping the signal. There's no way, they can try censor us all they want. It's never going to work.
Good luck.
And I'm, at that point, I still had some hair, and I think that's when I tore the last of it out. I was like, you guys are like, I remember this conversation, 25 years ago. I remember this conversation almost verbatim, the same sort of reasoning. Oh, yeah, it may look daunting. They may get a couple victories here and there. But, the human engineering, the human ingenuity and creativity will always be able to outsmart the machine. And I'm thinking, you don't have a chance. You don't understand how these things work. And this was another really big development for me is when Google Jigsaw, which is effectively the CIA branch of Google, and I can talk about that.
We will. Yeah.
When Google Jigsaw released something called Perspective API, which was a tool that which ran a toxicity score assessment on everything on the internet. You could actually go to their website. You could plug in a sentence or a paragraph or a page from a book, and it would scan it and it would spit out a toxicity score level. So you could put in William Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be, and it'll give you like a 14% toxicity score. And you can put in, a Notorious B.I.G. song, and it'll give you like a 54% toxicity score, and it would give you an identity threat score, a hate speech score, a gender identity score,
God.
a misinformation score. And I saw this, and this is exactly the way chess engines work. It gives you this sort of probabilistic, it gives a readout of lines, and then they'll say negative 0.73, and that will mean black is winning by 0.7 of a pawn, and that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, it works the same way. Language is not infinite in the same way that chess is not. There's only a finite number of words. Every time there's new slang that develops, that can be added very quickly by somebody on the coding side, and it pre-censors you. You get killed in the algorithm from it. And not only that, it allows you to very creatively structure things so that if you have, for example, like a 99% toxicity score, that might automatically delete it. But if it's a 90% toxicity score, it might send it into a purgatory zone where it's shadow banned. And they might set a threshold that, if it's 70% or less toxicity, then it will be allowed, whitelisted effectively, and be allowed to be said. And this I saw in these DARPA documents, and then traced it into the State Department, USAID, and basically all across the government and the national security state, that this was being developed as a tool to be able to control the course of elections around the world.
A couple months ago, I went out to North Carolina to go shooting up in the mountains with a bunch of dudes who knew how to shoot. So I knew we were going to be outside all day, shooting on the range, hiking up the mountain, and doing all kinds of things like that, which meant I needed footwear that I was going to be comfortable in while also remaining sturdy on uneven terrain, which is why I wore my Brunt Workwear waterproof boots. Brunt founder Eric Gerard grew up blue collar and started Brunt after his friends in the trades encouraged him to start a workwear brand that was really built for them. That's why all Brunt products are named after the guys he grew up with. So this Father's Day, upgrade the hardest working guy you know with boots that are as tough and dependable as he is. Whether he needs waterproof, safety toe or soft toe, pull on or lace up, Brunt's got him covered. These might be the most comfortable work boots on the planet, and they're built to perform day after day. Plus, Brunt lets Dad try him on the job. If they don't blow him away, he can send him right back. Brunt didn't just make a durable work boot. They reinvented comfort for the hardest workers out there. For Father's Day, not only does Brunt have special discount bundles, our listeners are getting $10 off at Brunt using code Julian, that's Julian, at checkout. Link in description below. Once again, head to bruntworkwear.com, use code Julian, and you're all set. And after you buy, please do me a favor. When Brunt asks you how you heard about them, tell them it was from the Julian Dorey podcast. So happy Father's Day to all the dads out there, and make it a great Father's Day for your dad by getting him some Brunt Workwear boots.
To be able to control the rise and fall of political movements, it was effectively an off button for opposition to the U.S. State Department. And when I recognized the totality of that by late 2017, early 2018, it completely changed my life. I started writing a book on this right away in 2016. Weapons of Mass Deletion it was about the AI story.
That's a good name.
It's this idea, it was this idea that AI censorship technology was to speech what nuclear weapons were to warfare, completely changing the face of it forever. You don't need a standing army of 1 million troops to be able to take on another country with 1 million troops. Right. All you need are 2 or 3 atom bombs, and it's over. And you could do this. You wouldn't need a standing army of hundreds of thousands of manual sensors in order to keep up with hundreds of thousands of misinformation purveyors. You just need 2 or 3 lines of code.
Right.
And then late 2017, a law passed in Germany called NetzDG, which effectively required the use of AI scan and ban technology in order to be compliant with German law. It imposed a $54 million fine for each incidence of so-called hate speech at the time that was not removed by the platform within 48 hours. And there was a safe harbor for companies that had AI filters. And then that quickly spread across Europe. And then 2018 is really when Americans started to feel this huge closure of the things that they could talk about online. And it was all coming from this transatlantic government alliance, effectively, between the U.S. and effectively NATO, which was concerned that Brexit in the UK was going to cause Frexit in France if Marine Le Pen won.
Right.
It would cause Drexit in Germany if the AfD party won. It would cause Spexit in Spain if the Spanish Vox party won. It'll exit in Italy with Matteo Salvini. And so they thought, okay, if we allow free speech on the internet, NATO will dissolve, the EU will dissolve, and then NATO will dissolve, and then there's no enforcement arm for the IMF and the World Bank, so the international banks will collapse. So, it would be the ending scene from Fight Club if we don't censor the internet.
Quick question, Mike, because obviously this is sinister as and you and I are going to be on the same side of this issue with you. The slippery slope of banning free speech is far worse than the alternative. I think we just have to set that as a baseline. Trying to understand where people may think, where the difference between like evil versus like just the right intentions and completely wrong, I guess, like game plan would be. Is it possible that some of the people in these organizations who are coming up with this stuff, be it in NATO or in the EU or all the above, are looking at it like a lot of this stuff is an attack from the East on our systems to try to break us all apart, which is going to fuck us in the long run? Therefore, I guess it's better to censor speech so that doesn't happen?
I think that's bullshit. I think all of Russiagate was bullshit. I think
it was proven. It was
yeah, it was complete bullshit. I mean, you have John Brennan, the CIA director, with advanced knowledge before it even happened that Hillary Clinton. What was Brennan's note to Obama that Hillary Clinton was working on concocting, a narrative that Donald Trump would be backed by the Russians? I think that was in June 2016, July 2016, and the whole thing. But that was simply they needed that to have the legal predicate to use the tools of the national security state. The CIA is not allowed to go after domestic citizens, domestic politicians, domestic affairs at all.
Yep.
Neither is the State Department, neither is USAID, neither is the Department of War. But they have one get-out-of-Constitution jail-free card, and it's called counterintelligence. The CIA can spy on Americans as part of a counterintelligence probe if we suspect those Americans are being used wittingly or unwittingly by a hostile foreign nation state. So you need a Russiagate predicate if you want the CIA to spy on them. The USAID, the corruption factory that I think I've been a big part in blowing open here, they are not allowed. Their predicate is democracy promotion. They have all these programs to overthrow foreign governments in the name of promoting democracy. If we label a foreign leader a threat to democracy, that they are an autocrat and cracking down on their own people, and ironically, suppressing free speech, attacking the civil society institutions, cracking down on media, then we fund a regime change army within their country, NGOs, trade organizations, union groups, lawyers, judges, parliamentarians, university academics, student groups, ethnic identity groups, gender identity groups. We fund a whole army in order to topple that government in color revolutions if we declare them a threat to democracy. So if you want to unleash that NGO money spigot and create that army here with that government money, you need to come up with a lie that the person you're targeting is a threat to democracy. And lo and behold, what was the big word that they used about Trump? He was a threat to democracy, an autocrat, the same thing.
Dictator, yeah.
Exactly, because that's all they have.
Yep.
You know, I come back to the Derek Zoolander thing. They have one look. That's it. They have one look. And it's the moneymaker for them. Yeah. It's what made them the male models they are. But they need to throw that look, or else they don't have the magic. They can't arm the NGOs with all the money.
And they can't have
the
now.
What's that?
They've killed it now.
They've wounded it.
Wounded it.
Yeah, it's complicated. There have been a lot of big actions that are partially instated, but there's a long ways to go to bring it to the finish line, and it's getting very bumpy. Mm-hmm. The courts have blocked implementation of a lot of it, and we can get into specifics. And the other side of it is, so, you know, the executive branch has done, I think, more in 130 days than any executive branch in my lifetime on this, and more than I thought that they would be able to accomplish in 4 years already, just in a little over 4 months. But there are two holdups. There's the judicial branch layer and the legislative branch layer. A huge portion of the Republican side of Congress is juiced by these same skids as the Democrats are. They're internationalists. They represent multinational corporations who want USAID to cut the wind for them, who want State Department international affairs budgets to ink deals for their companies or to secure markets for them. They want war to secure natural resources or to secure supply lines or to secure territory or to alter the dynamics of trade. Oil and gas, for example, was big on this when it comes to Ukraine, Russia.
Yeah.
Blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline created the giant market for U.S. liquefied natural gas. All of the, Exxon, Chevron, Shell in the UK, Norway, all of these countries made hundreds of billions of dollars because of the CIA via Ukraine blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. And so, and a lot of that is Republican. And so what we're seeing is that many of these DOGE cuts are not making it through into this big, beautiful bill. I've seen some figure that it was only 5.4% of the DOGE cuts are actually going to be codified.
Can you explain how that works? Because I think a lot of times, like, we make the mistake of just hearing, like, USAID and DOGE, we're cutting shit, but people have, and I'll speak for myself too, like, there's a lack of understanding of exactly how it starts at the beginning of the machine and actually gets to the end result of, like, finished products. So when you're saying DOGE goes to make a cut, what's the process it fully has to go through for then that to be implemented? Yeah.
Well, maybe we can take it one thing at a time as an example, crystallize that example, and then that'll help sort of explain the system. So take USAID. USAID is a U.S. government agency that was created through an executive order and then codified by law in 1961. And it's been operating as a so-called independent agency since then. But its whole role is a State Department role, in the same way the CIA's role is just a State Department role. And maybe I'll take a little bit of a detour to explain that.
Sure.
USAID is being folded up as an agency so that its remnant can be rolled up into the State Department. So the State Department could just directly run what USAID used to do. And this was the same debate that was had around the time of the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency under the National Security Act of 1947. Ultimately, everything the CIA does is as an assistant support function for either the State Department or the Defense Department. Everything they do is just the covert side of advancing national interests for the State Department or national security for the Pentagon. That is why the CIA is a junior player at the table in Washington.
Junior.
Yes. I give this example. Think about like The Sopranos, and
You're in the right state for that.
yeah, that's right. So you've got the mob bosses in Jersey and New York, and then you've got these henchmen and muscle who enforce the edicts of the bosses. And so take someone like Furio, right? Furio is the dude who, a hairdresser owes debt to the family or to the crew. Furio busts in with a baseball bat.
Non te preocupa.
Yeah, right. Gets in your face, breaks your knuckles, destroys your business, and says, leaves you bloody and says, you better be back, I'll be back for the rest of it next week. And if you don't have it, you, your wife, and your dog are dead. And so it's very easy if you are the hairdresser looking at that to be like, holy shit, Furio runs the mafia.
Yeah, I see.
But that's not the case at all. It is going from CIA director to Secretary of State is a massive, massive promotion. Mike Pompeo was the CIA director for Donald Trump. He was promoted to Secretary of State. Leon Panetta was CIA director for Bill Clinton. He was promoted to Secretary of Defense. It is the support role for dirty work that is authorized by the State Department, the DOD, the National Security Council at the White House. And so it's a limited domain. This is a very similar relationship to the FBI and DOJ. Everyone, the FBI literally does the Furio work. They break into your home.
Yeah.
They'll raid your underwear drawer. They'll, and all manner of dirty tricks. But everything the FBI does has to be authorized by the Justice Department. And the Justice Department is not as sexy in the eyes of the public because people see a sort of thick bureaucratic layer of, pencil necks and nerd type folks and prosecutors with their briefcases. And they see the thug work being carried out by the FBI, and they go, "Oh, the FBI is really running the show." No. The Attorney General determines everything the FBI can do, and it's the same thing with the CIA and the State Department. The State Department determines effectively, together with the White House National Security Council, everything the CIA can do, and CIA directors get fired when they do not obey that chain of command. That's what happened to Alan Dulles. One of the
Allegedly.
Well,
you may have still run that from Georgetown. Let's be honest.
Well, that is.
There is a dead president. I just want to throw that out there.
Hey, it's the same thing here, though. Where does that Georgetown network get its power? What you have is if you have competing power factions within Washington, and you get tossed out of power, you lose an election, you fall out of favor with the president or the Secretary of State, you get tossed from your job. You don't, necessarily go gently into that good night. You team up with the other shadow elements who continue to want that president out of power, and you will continue to work with that wider shadow network that are in the NGOs, in the universities, in the big philanthropic political action funds, in other parts of the government that are allied with you and that provide a resistance point. And so there is this recycling factory that happens if you are trying to undermine the president's vision or the Secretary of State's declared foreign policy goals, and you try to fight from the inside and you get purged, you glom right on to the other elements that are allied with you to continue that work. I mean, that's who usually cuts your checks. And we're seeing the same thing right now in the censorship space. As we have cut so much of the government censorship infrastructure out of the U.S., those U.S. censors in exile are now all going to Europe to work with their in-power government allies in the UK, in France, in Germany, in the EU to get their big censorship law, the EU Digital Censorship Act, it's technically the EU Digital Services Act, which will have jurisdiction over the United States, and that's their secret weapon. They talk about this openly, that they would be, quote, depressed and dejected if they didn't have their secret weapon, this European law, to force censorship back on America. But getting back to this process, so USAID was, it's, I think technically on July 1, it will no longer exist as an executive branch. Right.
Whoa.
Right. It's already functionally non-existent in the sense that its name has been taken off the building. 14,000 employees have been laid off. I believe they only kept a couple hundred hand-picked ones. All of the overseas offices have been closed, and there is basically a small team that is doing, the transition so that on July 1, the remaining function of USAID will be directly under the control of the State Department. This is why Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State, is also the USAID administrator, because that function, and they already have so many overlapping functions. It's head spinning, but that is because it's supposed to. USAID was never supposed to be an independent agency. That was always a cover front for it, in the same way that the CIA is. It's I always say when it's too dirty for the CIA, you give it to USAID, and everyone always laughs when I say that, and I try
just
to.
Funny,
No, I know.
Yeah.
But I mean it. That's not an exaggeration. It's like, it's funny to everybody else, but it's like I'm trying to say something very serious when I say it, which is that USAID, there are chains on the CIA. Every covert action undertaken by the Central Intelligence Agency has to be approved in writing by the President of the United States. Every single one. They had to go through a process called a presidential finding. And this was because that when the CIA started going rogue and presidents started saying, yeah, I didn't know about that. I didn't know the CIA was doing that. Congress, imposed this requirement that they have to get a presidential finding or else it's illegal. Well, USAID, because it is not required to get a presidential finding, can do the dirtiest of dirty work that the CIA could not. If the president doesn't want to give approval for it, doesn't want to be caught giving the sign-off for it, then instead of calling it covert action through the Central Intelligence Agency, you run it as discrete democracy promotion through USAID.
It's a shell company, effectively.
Yeah, and it allows a level of secrecy that is not allowed the Central Intelligence Agency. There is no oversight for USAID. This is the motivating reason for folding USAID into the State Department, because it's an independent agency, even though its whole purpose, its sole and exclusive purpose, is to support State Department foreign policy through effectively dual-use programs. We are providing poverty relief in, rural Peru, but there's a sort of philanthropic use front, humanitarian NGO work, but the State Department wants to work with the coca leaves, farmers there, or wants to rally groups of indigenous folks or people in the agriculture labor as part of an effort to control the internal politics of the country. We're doing, public health facilities and vaccine clinics in Pakistan. I mean, this was a major problem for the CIA actually in 2012.
It was a problem for them?
This episode is sponsored by Huel. If you're constantly on the move or just tired of skipping meals, Huel has you covered. Their Black Edition ready to drink is a total game changer. You're talking about a complete meal in one bottle with 35 grams of protein, 27 vitamins and minerals, high fiber and low sugar, so that you feel full, focused, and ready for your day. No prep, no cleanup, just grab and go. Huel's already sold over 500 million meals around the world, and now it's your turn to try it. New customers are going to get 15% off today, plus a free gift at Huel, Huel.com when you use my code Julian, Julian, at checkout. So don't miss out. Try it today. As you guys well know, Alessi, Joe, and I are constantly balancing recordings with getting content out for this show, and sometimes when I have someone coming in, I don't have time to go through and get a full lunch. That's where Huel Black Edition comes in. It's my go-to in those scenarios. It keeps me full, energized, and focused so that I can put the best podcast out possible. And Huel also tastes good. It's like a milkshake, and it comes in chocolate or vanilla. And as a little bonus on top, it also happens to be low sugar. Lastly, Huel is incredibly affordable. With high protein meals less than $5, it's a budget-friendly option if you've ever seen one. So start saving time and money without compromising your nutrition today with this exclusive offer for new customers of 15% off plus a free gift using my exclusive code Julian, Julian, at Huel.com. That's Huel.com. Once again, that's 15% off plus a free gift for all new customers using my exclusive code Julian at Huel.com. Please see my description for the terms and conditions. Skip the stress, not the nutrition. Try Huel today for complete nutrition bottled.
Well, the CIA got busted in 2012 running fake vaccine clinics in Pakistan this is, pull it up.
You gotta love that. In 2012.
2012.
Man, they were ahead of the curve.
Right. Well, but USAID took the baton after this. I can tell you this whole story.
Oh, so they got to blame and just say, oh, it was USAID, sorry.
Well, they vowed not to do it, and then USAID moved into the space.
Right. All right, so what do we got here? Can we scroll up a little bit, Joe?
I got the right thing here.
All right, fake CIA vaccine campaign when the end doesn't justify the means. In early January 2013, a dozen deans from America's premier public health schools wrote President Obama a letter protesting the CIA's use of a faked vaccination campaign in the hunt for
Now, let me stop this right here.
Yeah, I know what this one is now. Yeah,
You're going to get a retail history if you look at CSIS is the military's think tank. They're a major think tank.
Oh, that's what I'm reading.
Yeah, that's what you're reading here. So here's what was happening in the background here. General David Petraeus, who would also become CIA director, declared a stated goal of collecting 85% of the biometrics of every citizen in Central Asia as part of its Afghanistan, Iraq, the works, in order to go through with a program they called identity dominance. And Joe, if you want to pull this up, run a Google image search for Afghanistan Army iris scanning, and just like leave open like the Google image, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Okay.
Oh my God.
So here's what was happening at the time. The U.S. government was waging this counterinsurgency, and the problem is they didn't have the identifiable biometrics of the population, and so when there would be huge crowds of protests, we would have satellites flying overhead, and we'd see 10,000 people on the move, but we didn't know who they were. We didn't have their eyeballs. We didn't have their blood samples. If there was a fight, or if there was, if they checked into a hospital, we weren't able to necessarily, track down everything. And so Petraeus declared a doctrine, and it would carried on, and it would be known as identity dominance. If you just pull up a new tab, but if you just stay on this so we can close this out, just like pull, like just zoom into any one of those, or just make it larger.
5, Joe.
And this is what was being done manually.
It's like Sean Ryan's old thumbnail.
Yeah, and you'll see this. They were literally every person they saw. The U.S. military would have to walk up to them and scan their eyeball, and so if you go to if you just go to Google and you just type in identity dominance, and then if you maybe make it like a controlled Boolean search, if you just okay, or you can do it that way, and you'll see the ability to link individuals to their past identities and activities. And this was a U.S. military concept around the need to get the biometric identifiers of literally their goal was, I think, 85% of the population in Iraq, Afghanistan, and by extension, Pakistan, because Pakistan was the main training and arming ground since the days of the Mujahideen, when the CIA created the Mujahideen Islamic Fundamentalist Army and then trained them in neighboring Pakistan, and then set up, BCCI and the CI proprietary banks to run the drugs and guns through. But so they were running this identity dominance program to collect all the local biometrics. And when the scandal came out, they were saying, oh, no, it was, we were just trying to get Osama bin Laden. That's why we were using fake vaccine drives.
Pretty sure I saw that in Zero Dark 30 too. They got that one right in there.
But no, this was a biometric collection program. They were doing this. But again, so what the public sees as a vaccine program and a bunch of finger wagging if you don't trust vaccines. But what you have is a Central Intelligence Agency operation. And so that was 2012. It took 18 months for the Central Intelligence Agency to say that it would stop using vaccine clinics and public health facilities to run CIA operations out of. It took them 18 months for them to say we won't do that anymore, after this outcry had played out in a huge amount of time. So look at what else was going on in 2014 at that time. Just go to Google and type in USAID fake HIV clinic, Cuba.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
All right, what do we got?
So CIA says, okay, we're not going to do this anymore.
Fake U.S. HIV prevention program and secret, what was that? Secret anti-Cuba scheme. Okay, go down, Joe. A report from the Associated Press revealed that the U.S. government has been secretly sending young Latin Americans to Cuba under the guise of health and civics programs, including an HIV prevention workshop, in hopes of provoking political change in the country. Advocates say the scheme could undermine international trust of U.S. global health efforts for years to come. According to documents from the investigation, since 2009, USAID has paid nearly a dozen young people from Venezuela, Costa Rica, and Peru to work undercover and scout for people they could turn into political activists.
And then I'm going to read this one here.
Sure.
According to interviews with staff members, the U.S. government sent some workers into Cuba under the disguise of tourists. In another case, workers were told to set up an HIV workshop, which memos called, quote, the perfect excuse for perpetuating the U.S. government's goals. The perfect excuse, HIV prevention workshops. Now, USAID does these public health programs in every country in the world, effectively. It's one of the top programs at USAID by expenditures, all these public health programs. And another thing that happened that same year with USAID in Cuba was the ZunZuneo scandal, which I've talked about a bunch.
Z-U-N...
Yeah, you just pull up the Wikipedia for ZunZuneo.
Okay.
And there's a great Guardian article on this as well. Okay. And you'll see another reason that this was structured through USAID.
All right, so ZunZuneo was an online social networking and microblogging service created by the USAID and marketed to... Oh, yeah, I've seen a clip of you talking about this. Marketed to Cuban users following recommendations by the Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba. It was covertly developed as a long-term strategy to encourage Cuban youth to revolt against the nation's government, fomenting a political spring. The service officially began operating in 2010, but ran out of money 2 years later because of its clandestine and subversive nature. It became a target of criticism.
Yeah, and I just want to, because the next two paragraphs here on the origins and funding are very useful for understanding the structuring of CIA work through USAID. So ZunZuneo, so this was a complete Twitter knockoff. Literally, ZunZuneo, as you'll see, it says it means like a hummingbird's call. It was literally the Twitter bird. At one point, they even asked Jack Dorsey to help run it, and it had the retweet button.
They got drunk Don Draper to come up with that name,
right.
Twitter, but for Cuba.
Right? No, exactly. Now, what was happening? You have to remember, at this time, the Arab Spring was popping off.
Yes,
and this was the high watermark of CIA social media work. This grew out of this whole Jared Cohen State Department policy planning staff idea that instead of the CIA running color revolutions through U.S. embassies, consulates, and CIA station houses, we could run through social media and galvanize supercharged street revolutions by using Twitter hashtags, Facebook pages, YouTube video calls to action. Basically, the State Department said to the CIA, "What are we doing? Just trying to recruit people." Through churches and union groups, like all the young people who are the battering ram of this whole operation, they're all on Twitter, they're all on Facebook, they're all on YouTube. So, and you can, if you want to pull up a new tab just real quick, you'll see what I'm, just type in an article called Condi's Party Starter, Jared Cohen, for Condi as in Condoleezza Rice. If you just pull, just like in a new tab.
He's over here. He's going to pull it.
Carter's, what else?
Jared Cohen, you'll see it. I think it's the New Yorker. You'll just get an idea of this. There's a million of these.
Got it. Here we go.
Yeah. And this is what, 2007. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So-
Way back.
Yeah. Well, this was because
During Bush. Yeah. Condi's in.
right.
Yep.
And Jared Cohen was kept by Hillary Clinton in the State Department there. He was the young gun whiz kid who was brought into the State Department's policy planning staff, which is really the central coordinating place at state that coordinates overt activity by the State Department with covert activity by the Central Intelligence Agency. And so Jared Cohen was a very, very young guy when he got to the policy planning staff. He was in his mid-20s. Young kid, he was brought in to essentially provide a young person's view on how to do, this sort of work. And he would form movements.org for, student movements and young people movements, particularly in the Middle East and Central Asia. These big conflict zone places, during the Bush era. And he looked around at these 40, 50, 60-year-olds on the policy planning staff and said, you guys are completely out of touch. Everyone in these countries are using this new social media, which had just come out. Facebook came out in 2004.
Yep.
YouTube came out in 2005. Twitter came out in 2006. 2007 was the year the smartphone came out, iPhone 1.
Yep.
And he said, this thing is lightning in a bottle. We want to get people mobilized. This is the biggest mobilization force on earth. We can use this to foment revolution, start parties. This was the party starter in Tunisia in the Arab Spring. This was the party starter in Egypt.
This.
Yes, they were Facebook revolutions, Twitter revolutions. And so the Central Intelligence Agency and USAID were so inspired by this Arab Spring, they wanted to get a Cuban Spring, a street revolution using social media in Cuba. The problem was Cuba at the time had banned Twitter. So it was blocked. It was a criminal offense for VPNs. Attempts had been unsuccessful to try to get a node to do that. So what they did is and if you go back to the Wikipedia, you'll see how dirty this is.
ZunZuneo.
ZunZuneo, yeah. So
First tab.
so this whole thing was structured in order to make it look like it was by Cubans for Cubans. That way, it would not trigger the counterintelligence capacities of Cuba. It would not be banned under the Twitter ban. It would look like it was set up by Cubans as a social media networking site for Cubans, but it was secretly created for, funded by, and backed by USAID. And you'll see what they did is they took it was funded by millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer funds concealed as humanitarian funds designated for Pakistan. Now, Julian, I don't know if you've seen a world map lately, but
That's right there. Yeah. That one's actually from the 80s. That's a bad example. I'm sorry. It's an old globe.
well, I'm looking at that globe right here, and I can't even see. I see Pakistan. I can't even see Cuba on the same hemisphere view.
Yeah, but it's a big galaxy, Mike. We're one little rock right here. We're so close to each other. I'm fucking with you. He's like so upset at that.
If you went to usaspending.gov and you looked up the grant for this, you would see humanitarian relief for Pakistan. You would see fuck all about how the funds are actually being used. And look at what they actually did here. So contractors funded by USAID set up a Byzantine system of front companies using a Cayman Islands bank account and recruiting unsuspecting executives who would not be told of the company's ties to the U.S. government. Private companies, Creative Associates International, they are a major CIA USAID contractor. It's CAI. It's not CIA, it's CAI. And you'll see they were also working with USAID to secretly fund the hip-hop movement in Cuba to overthrow the Cuban government through anti-government rap anthems, which is a huge USAID. The State Department has, I can't even tell you how hard, the CIA runs the rap game. It's insane. The State Department just recently brought 22 hip-hop artists from all these different conflict zones. I can walk you through in Bangladesh how USAID was funding rap musicians, reporting back to the State Department about how the songs were designed to create street protests, producing their music videos. We can even watch some of these music videos if you want to
From
get into
other
this.
countries. You're talking about ones from other countries right now.
Yeah, yeah. I can show you the internal document.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let's do it.
but-
That's why you're here. Let's go.
But just stick with this for one sec because I want to just show you, just to make this really clean.
this guy's a fire hose. I love it. There's so much here. It's
Okay,
awesome.
so they get these two contractors at USAID. So again, that's now money coming from us as taxpayers from our income tax to USAID, then subcontracted down into two different levels of subcontractors who are then funneling the money through a Byzantine layer of Cayman Islands offshore bank accounts, which, by the way, was a structure that was originally conceived of by the Central Intelligence Agency. You can look up a guy named Paul Helliwell, who was the CIA's lead lawyer during the Cold War. Just type in on a new tab, Paul Helliwell, CIA, Castle Bank and Trust. This is a good example of
Castle
this.
banking, yeah. Got it.
And then we'll come back to this Wikipedia in a second. Paul Helliwell is
Let's pull that over. We got it.
Hellillwell. Oh, okay, all right.
How the CIA helped Disney conquer Florida?
Yeah,
Does
well,
this sound
because
like
Paul,
him?
well, yes, because Paul Helliwell went from being the CIA's lawyer to Disney's lawyer.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's convenient.
We have to understand Disney was a big time propaganda company for the War Department during World War II, during the Cold War. This connects to the whole media apparatus that where the U.S. government did favors for Disney did favors for the U.S. government. Today, now a lot of Disney media properties are also wrapped up in this whole thing. But if you run a search, this is I haven't seen this particular article, but let's just see if you run Control F for Castle Bank, or just Castle. Okay, well, just go to Castle Bank. Just look up Castle Bank and Trust.
Castle Bank, just that.
Yeah,
No
just
Helliwell?
that. Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
In the Bahamas.
Yeah, in the Bahamas.
Good
yeah.
location.
Yeah. Okay, so it was a Bahamas bank that was involved in tax evasion, and this is a CIA proprietary bank. Yeah, founded in the 1960s by Paul Helliwell.
Yep.
Who is
Oh, he was an OSS guy. He was an OG.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, this started
Yeah.
right away. I mean, this is really what created the rise of offshore banking in the essentially the OSS found that the Vatican Bank was a very I'm not joking.
We're hitting every keyword. This is incredible.
Well,
going.
but this is
They
true.
found that the Vatican Bank was what?
Okay, a great source on this if you want to read it. This great book by
Gerald Posner.
by Paul Williams. It's called Operation Gladio.
Okay.
The Unholy Alliance Between the CIA, the Vatican, and the Mob. And it's a great book. It goes through this history, but there's a dozen other sources that you can find this in as well. But we were at war with Mussolini in Italy,
Yes.
and that was a conflict that really started in the 1930s. And at the time, you had Mussolini cracking down on two forces within Italy: the mob, the Italian mafia in the south, and the Vatican, and the Vatican, there'd always been this, multinodal factor of power in the Roman Empire and in Italy between the church and the state, and the church commanded a lot of allegiance, and the Mussolini was threatened by the Vatican's power and its influence and its opposition to Mussolini policies. And Mussolini was also a very strong law and order guy who was cracking down on organized crime. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
And that made the Vatican and the Southern Italian Mafia very, very, very close allies of the U.S. military and of the OSS, which was the military branch that was the predecessor to the CIA. And so we used the Southern Italian Mafia networks as both paramilitaries within Italy to be for conflict against the Italian police and the Italian military, as well as for a beachhead, because they controlled the ports. So they controlled the ability to get supplies, to get guns, to get money, to get cash, to get food, to get aid So all of that was an organized crime network that was a powerful ally of the U.S. military and a protected ally of the U.S. military because of how useful it was. Same thing with the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank Vatican City is a sovereign nation state.
Yes.
It's the smallest country in the world, but because it is a sovereign entity, it can set its own banking rules, and it effectively served as a way to shield, to wash money. You could launder money through the Vatican Bank, and no one would know because it was effectively independent of the international finance system. And so the CIA teamed up with organized crime and with the Vatican Bank in order to run covert operations money through. And
So this is when it became CIA after the war you're talking about.
well,
When
the
OSS
very first when the National Security Act came out in 1947, NSC, and if you want to follow along, you can just literally Google all this stuff as I talk about it. NSC 1-1 was called the I forget the title of it, but the thrust of it was, I believe it was called the U.S. interests in Italy. It was about if you just look up NSC 1/1.
saying N is in Nancy?
Yeah, as a National Security Council. This is the National Security Council is the interagency White House coordination for the CIA, the State Department. How do you get unified action between the CIA, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Justice Department? It runs through the National Security Council. Yeah, so this is 1-1. The position of the United States with respect to Italy. So you'll see this is November 1947. And this memo is all about how how important it is for the United States to secure control over Italy as it opens up for its first democratic elections after the war.
Yep.
And basically says, listen, there's two people running this. There's our puppet and there's the Soviet Union's puppet.
Yep.
And our boy better win, or else if Italy falls, all of Europe is going to fall. And so if you go to another memo now, George Kennan from the policy planning staff, look up the inauguration of organized political warfare.
The inauguration of organized political warfare.
Yeah. Let's see if that one.
Policy planning staff memorandum?
Yeah, this is
1948?
Yeah, but there's a version that's April 30th, 1948,
Okay,
which is
let's
just
do
12
April-
days after.
Yeah, let's do April.
But you'll see that's on the state.gov. If you, actually, look at the Wilson Center, that third link there. Oh, right there.
That one?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. April 30th, 1948. It was up
Yeah,
there.
this is 12 days after the U.S. Here you go. If you just
Oh, wow. This is the actual document,
yeah,
too.
yeah. Now this wasn't declassified, I believe, until 2005, from 1948.
Okay. Do you
Now-
want to read this?
Yeah, I'm gonna read the key parts of this. But you know what's crazy? I give lectures all over the place to folks in the diplomacy world, and everybody knows George Kennan, who's really the godfather of modern diplomacy in many ways. He was the first head of the policy planning staff at the State Department, which is one of those powerful places in there, and he was the author of the containment strategy against Russia, the author essentially of our Cold War meta strategy. And he was famously the guy who gave the CIA its plausible deniability powers. He was the author of NSC 10-2, which is the national security memo that that gives the CIA plausible deniability, so that gives them their ability to lie publicly.
Yes.
But so everybody knows about NSC 10-2 from 1948, and I've never been in front of a crowd who's ever read this incredible document from just 2 months before NSC 10-2, before CIA plausible deniability, by the very guy. And here's what this says. So the inauguration of organized political warfare. And he goes on to say that this ranges from overt actions such as political alliances and economic measures, which what we would now think of as USAID. ERP here refers to the Europe Relief Program, the Marshall Plan. Us sending huge amounts of money into Europe for post-war reconstruction, but in return we get political influence over everybody, all the governments of Europe, because they're dependent on us for bribe money. And so he says, so it ranges from those overt actions like our alliances and overt aid, as well as white propaganda, to such covert operations as clandestine support of friendly foreign elements, black psychological warfare, and even encouragement of paramilitary regime change. That effectively is what he's saying here. It says the creation, success, and survival of the British Empire has been due in part to British understanding and application of political warfare. And this is, if anyone's seen Lawrence of Arabia, I mean, they've been doing this a long time, the Brits. And so they're worried at the time about the Bolsheviks using organized political warfare, and then if we don't create this capacity to have a organized covert operations arm of the U.S. government, then we will lose to whoever does, like they mentioned the Bolsheviks will.
Real quick, Mike, I don't like, there's so much information, like I don't like getting you off a flow, but I do have a question there that I think is important.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a middle ground there, as painful as that is?
Of course.
In the sense that if you don't do it, someone else will, so you have to do something?
Of course.
Okay.
I have my own opinions on that and how to strike the balance, but I think it's important for people to understand the anatomy of the patient that they're operating on before they make conclusions about how to do the surgery. And most people don't even know the anatomy of the thing. They form opinions and don't even know what they're breaking or messing with before they get there. Because I get a lot of people. I feel the same way about USAID.
Yeah.
The New York Times and Washington Post credit me for taking down USAID. I'm not even taking credit. But the fact is that I've been painted as the guy who took down USAID. And I was put in a weird position because I think that there is a role for a USAID function in being able to project soft power influence. Yes. And the issue is not necessarily that the capacity exists, but that it has gone so rogue, and the way it has defined national interest has become so perverse. I mean, the final straw for me was when USAID was funding censorship laws in foreign countries, and not only that, funding censorship laws for the explicit purpose of taking out U.S. social media companies, going after, telling Europe, USAID having formal programs to get Europe to crack down on X and Facebook. You can't do that under the First Amendment. So you have USAID funding foreign governments to go after U.S. national champions. This is what we have USAID to stop.
Right.
When I was at the State Department, we have a national champions policy. We define U.S. interests as being U.S. citizens, U.S. multinational corporations, U.S. resource interests. We run whole operations to protect U.S. companies. And USAID was running whole operations to destroy U.S. companies just because they belong to a political affiliation.
It got so bad that it got so big that it boomeranged back on itself, essentially.
It became the easy button
to
win a political fight. Use this because it's an organized political warfare capacity that you're sitting on. If you occupy that office and you're losing the political war right now. So, the analogy I give is it's like there's a thumbie war in politics. One side wins, the other side wins. But, if you were just able to cheat and use your index finger, this thing's a lot more nimble, and powerful. You're not allowed to use it unless you're cheating, but it's always there. It's always there. If they really start getting you up. And that's what this organized political warfare capacity is at state, at USAID, at CIA, at DOD. And here's what Kennan says.
We're back on this document.
We have been handicapped, however, by a popular attachment to the concept of a basic difference between peace and war, by a tendency to view war as a sporting contest outside all political contexts, and by, you'll see he crosses out, by a public yearning for a political cure-all. And he says, let me soften it, a national tendency to seek a political cure-all, and by a reluctance to recognize the realities of international relations. Saying the American people don't understand the need for us to create this dirty work capacity. Now, if you scroll down here, you'll see that it goes on, talks about the Truman Doctrine, And I want to get to the Italy part of this. I mean, there's so much good stuff in here. I have a pinned tweet I have a 45-minute video that's pinned to the top of my X account. There you go. And you'll see on paragraph 5 here that goes through this in detail. But it's at Mike Ben Cyber, by the way. I have a 45-minute video
links
on this.
links down below.
Literally goes through all the highlights. This document will change your entire vision of the Central Intelligence Agency, the national security apparatus, because this is in the moment we were setting it up. And it says, okay, if you scroll to the bottom, it says, in having been engaged, okay, we cannot afford to leave unmobilized our resources for covert political warfare. We cannot afford in the future, in perhaps more serious political crises, to scramble into impromptu covert operations as we did at the time of the Italian elections. What he says in this memo is, God, that Italy operation worked so well. We worked with the mob. We worked with the Vatican. We worked with the Catholic charities. We worked with the unions, and we broke up opposition party meetings. We stuffed ballot boxes. We imported the propaganda arm, and it worked. And you can actually see. I think it was Miles Copeland who published a book afterwards. He was one of the OSS and then CIA guys, the original gang. He wrote a book called Cloak and Dagger, and in the book he says if we had not intervened through the CIA on that election, we would have lost 60-40. But we tilted that election by working with the mob. And he even talks openly, as the guy running that operation, that they worked with the mob, they worked with the church, and thank God we did that, or else the commies would have won, and then there might have never been an election in Italy again. But I bring that up to say that you have this. They saw the success of that in Italy, and then internationalized that and said, you know what? Actually, this is the template for what the CIA is going to do. It's not just going to be an intelligence collection and analysis arm. It's going to have an operations track, and you'll see here. This is right before that was all created. And if you just scroll down a little, or actually go, I think, yeah, okay, you'll see actually in the top of this page, he says it a dozen times in this. Okay, says where they should be fitted into the structure of this government and how the Department of State should exercise this direction and coordination. And then if you go the next page, there might be 2 pages. Yeah, here you go. You'll see there are all these references. Go one more page over. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, one more. Yeah. Well, covert political warfare must be controlled by the department. He's talking about the Department of State. That's this. The direction should not be physically in the Department of State. This is the more true when it is realized that the considerable funds necessary for such an operation could not be concealed in the Department of State's budget. Thus, therefore, this operation must find cover elsewhere. Such cover would permit a direct chain of command from the Secretary of State as the natural meeting ground for this. And then you'll see there should be promptly established under a Directorate of Political Warfare Operations, and basically says the State Department should run it, but it should be somewhere else besides the State Department. And that is
deniable.
That is where the CIA's plausible deniability authorization came in. This is 2 months before CIA got plausible deniability, carte blanche under an NSC 10-2. It's a State Department function, but the State Department does not want to get caught doing this. And if the operation gets busted, the State Department wants to be able to plausibly deny that they authorized it. Hence, it was given to the brand new spy agency in a brand new operations division. And so it's the same. So CIA is a State Department function. You could close up Langley, Virginia, and move that into a new floor of the State Department, and nothing would change. It is a State Department function. The State Department just doesn't want the responsibility for it. USAID was created as a plausible deniability layer for the Central Intelligence Agency and the State Department. We saw the power of using philanthropic fronts, NGO funding, civil society capacity building in the 1940s and 50s. And with the Marshall Plan, we wanted to internationalize it. We created USAID. And that way, it would be less scandal as well for the CIA. If something got busted, okay, well then a humanitarian NGO went rogue. It was not a covert operation. And in fact, getting back to ZunZuneo here, look at there's a I think it was Huffington Post. Look up on Google when covert action is discrete is not covert, discrete. Look up covert action, discrete action, ZunZuneo. And you'll see what I'm talking about here. Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah. When is covert action not covert? When it's discrete. So this is USA.
This is from 2014 too.
Yes. And you'll see basically, what this goes over is Obama was able to deny, because this happened under Obama. Obama said, I didn't know that USAID was doing this. I didn't know they were taking humanitarian funds earmarked for Canada. And by the way, this whole thing was completely grotesque. The USAID documents for this said that we will lull people to this news site, advertising it as a place for sharing sports, music, and hurricane updates. And then once we hit 100,000 subscribers to this, we are going to change the algorithm to hit people with revolutionary and anti-government. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that they collected everyone's phone numbers secretly. They created a political receptivity map, rated them on a 1 to 5 score of how likely they were to respond to messages to overthrow their own government. And that at the correct moment, they would be snapped into action, which is, by the way, what all the CIA documents say on organizationally on how to do this.
It's like an algorithmic Manchurian candidate at a mass social scale.
Yes. To be able to, a Manchurian movement.
Right.
And so Obama was able to say, well, I didn't authorize this. This was not U.S. government policy. Because if the CIA had done it, he would have had to have signed off on it. But if they run it through USAID, then they can say, oh, it went rogue.
But what if, hold on a second, just semantically here, because I want to understand this. If a CIA person doesn't even walk into the USAID office, but there's a phone call that's made there or anything or an email or something, isn't that technically traceable back to them? And therefore it's this does fall under your purview?
Well, only if it's subpoenaed.
Right.
And this is another issue. You can't get anything out of USAID. In fact, I wonder if they say this in this article. Can you scroll down? Just run a Control F for Senate, for example. Let's see if it's in this one. There's a Guardian article, I think, that goes through this. And
Senate's appropriation.
No, that's down here. Okay. Okay. If you just go to Google and you type in ZunZuneo, Senate, and then you say, we were not allowed to know. The quote is, we were not allowed to know, even in broad terms. We were told people would die.
That's very specific. I like this. U.S. secretly created
Guardian.
Cuban Twitter Guardian.
Guardian, then run a Control F for die, D-I-E. And again, look at even actually, if you go up to the top again, just read that headline. We'll come back to that in 1 sec. Just read that headline again. You'll see literally
U.S. secretly created Cuban Twitter to stir unrest and
hoping it could use to organize smart mobs.
Yeah.
These are literal mobs. The BLM style mobs. And now go. Okay, so yes. So okay. Now I'm just going to read this here for a second. So it says, McSpeeden was one of the guys running this. He worked for USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives. Now, transition means government overthrow.
You got to watch that word these days, transition.
Yeah,
it means a few things.
Well, it means something very destabilizing in any context.
Get your hair back.
Okay. And this was, it says, in 2009, a report by congressional researchers warned that the Office of Transition, and again, this is not a CIA division. This is a USAID division for regime change, for toppling governments. Through organized political warfare, mobilizing the unions to take to the streets, mobilizing boycotts and shutdown of roads and transportation systems and hospitals and schools. And then it goes on to say, okay, we were told we couldn't even be told in broad terms what was happening at USAID because people will die, said Fulton Armstrong, who worked for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Before that, he was the U.S. intelligence community's most senior analyst on Latin America, advised for Bill Clinton. So he was the top guy at CIA at the analyst division on all of Latin America, and even he can't get access to this secret operation being run out of USAID. And again, the whole thing works because it's a so-called independent agency. So even though it only exists to serve the State Department, if the Office of Inspector General says this is too sensitive, oversight is not allowed to know this, because if it leaks out of oversight, our people in Cuba will die. Our people in Pakistan will die. Our people in the Democratic Republic of Congo will die. It all has to be kept in-house. There is much more oversight of the Central Intelligence Agency than there is at USAID, which also allows people at CIA, if they can't get presidential approval, they'll work with their USAID friends. At the State Department, if you want to run a CIA operation, but you don't think you can get approval at the National Security Council, USAID isn't on the National Security Council. Just place the phone call, as you said, and you'll see these networks completely overlap at every level, and they're interchangeable jobs. Everyone, you get your job at USAID by coming up either through a State Department or aid-funded NGO, or you're working as the assistant secretary for Western Hemisphere, and then you'll go straight to USAID from there.
How many people work there approximately?
Well, there were 14,000 people who were there, as
that we know of.
Well, as employees. Now, 70% of the work is contractor work.
Yeah.
So that's 14,000 just W-2 employees.
Yeah.
Your 1099s or whatever, is like a whole iceberg.
So if we hire like a 17-year-old in Cuba, he's technically a 1099 for USAID.
Yeah, right. And run through these big companies, Chemonics, Creative Associates International. And so I bring this up to say that the point of this restructuring at USAID is so that there's finally oversight of the function. It's not to kill the function entirely. There will still be foreign assistance given in foreign countries for the cynical, self-serving purpose of advancing U.S. national interests. And this is a part of statecraft. This is something China does, where they build ports and roads and bridges, and then they get political influence over the economies. It's Chinese companies get the state contracts. Those countries vote with China as a bloc at the UN, in all the multilateral organizations. It builds goodwill by doing good things for foreign countries.
Well, they loan shark them, essentially. They give them loans that they know they can never pay back, and then they're like, bitch, we own you. Okay,
true. But what they're doing is a cheap Chinese knockoff of what we did. I mean, read Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. And, it's a manual of debt trap diplomacy through the IMF and the World Bank, which is a State Department DOD function. I mean, was it Robert McNamara, who was, JFK's Secretary of Defense, who his very next job was running the World Bank? These are not, it's not a banking job. These people know fuck all about banking spreadsheets. And
it looks good on LinkedIn, though.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the same thing with Tom Donilon. Tom Donilon was the guy, Joe Biden. It was his first pick to be CIA director. Yeah, pull up the Wikipedia on Tom Donilon if you want a real trip, or just actually look at his BlackRock profile.
And then he hired Epstein's buddy. I mean, he had all the right picks for CIA.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so the Wikipedia is pretty good. But if you go to the BlackRock profile, just type in Tom Donilon BlackRock Investment Institute. This is BlackRock's brain, and I call this the Blob to banker pipeline. Okay,
that's right here.
Yeah. Okay, so Tom Donilon is the chairman of BlackRock Investment Institute. This is the in-house think tank of BlackRock that is basically BlackRock's brain.
Right.
Now, they have $10 trillion of assets under management. They are, the globe-spanning octopus of the financial world. And here you have the head of their investment institute. And I'm going to read his profile, and I'm just going to maybe, does this WTF button work if...
That's right.
Every time you see something in this guy's resume about banking...
We're going to hit that.
Hit that button.
Red Man will love that.
Okay.
He was hitting that all the time.
Okay. So he served as National Security Advisor to Obama. Now, the National Security Advisor is the top job in the cabinet. It's the closest person to the president. The president only meets with the Secretary of State once a week. they'll talk. But the president meets with the National Security Advisor every day. The National Security Advisor is who synthesizes the State Department, the Defense Department, and the CIA. Defense, diplomacy, intelligence. It all runs through the National Security Advisor, who is the head of the National Security Council, which is the White House head of the State Department, DOD, CIA. So that's the top position on all things military, diplomacy, and intelligence. And so then I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. You'll see that he chaired the Obama-Biden transition at the State Department. He did all the debate prep for Obama in 2008. And then you'll see a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center, which is the major CIA branch, probably the worst CIA branch at all of Harvard. And I could sing you quite a song about the Belfer Center because it's an insane place. So then you'll see, okay, he's also, Columbia University's statecraft arm was effectively created by the CIA and the State Department in the 1950s. Columbia was the beachhead for Sovietology, Russian studies. The CIA in 1948 only had 38 Russia analysts.
Really?
And only 12 of them spoke Russian.
Whoa.
And so and I posted the documents for this on my X account at Mike Ben Cyber as well. And so they came up with a plan to merge academia, to get essentially to create within the universities subject matter expertise on Russian culture, Russian politics, Russian economics, and then build up Columbia University, Harvard University, Stanford University, build up the Eurasian studies, Russian studies, Central and Eastern European studies, and then all the area studies, Middle East studies, Latin American studies, African studies, Far East studies. And so this is why you see Harvard, Columbia, by the way, on this, is that they do operations under cover of being university arms. But then you'll see that below that, he was the Assistant Secretary of State and Chief of Staff for the State Department during the Clinton administration. He was responsible for developing major policy initiatives like NATO expansion in the 1990s. He's received the Secretary of State's Distinguished Service Award, the National Intelligence Distinguished Public Service Award, the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Joint Distinguished Civilian Service Award, and the CIA Director's Award. And if you look up the New York Times article, just type in New York Times, Bill Burns, Tom Donilon.
Oh, also look at his wife.
Yeah.
His wife was the U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues at the State Department from 13 to 17 and currently serves as UNICEF's Executive Director.
It's a family business. And so, type in, Bill Burns, Tom Donilon.
Oh, it's a big club and we ain't in it, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, here you go. That one. A CIA spy master with unusual powers. And if you go to the archive.is version of it, you can get through the paywall. So
there's a tool to do.
Yeah. Go ahead. Click that same link there. Copy the URL.
Okay.
Go to archive.is.
Come on.
Yeah. I got you.
How have we never used this?
I got you, dog. All right.
Bro.
Yeah. Now run a Control F for Donilon.
Oh, they're punching air on 42nd Street right
there you
now.
Go. Fuck them. Okay. After Mr. Biden won the presidency in 2020, transition officials asked Mr. Burns, this is the CIA Director Bill Burns, if he was interested in an ambassadorship. So Bill Burns, the CIA Director for all 4 years of the Biden administration, they just wanted him to be an ambassador. The guy they wanted to be CIA Director, according to the New York Times. But before Mr. Burns could respond, Mr. Biden's preferred candidate for CIA Director, Tom Donilon, decided against taking the job. So,
he decided against it.
Yeah, right. I'm saying Tom Donilon decided to stay at BlackRock rather than run the Central Intelligence Agency.
Because he knew the Ukraine war was coming and there's going to be a business of booming?
Oh, well, you know how he might have known? Type in Mike Donilon.
Oh, God. He's got a brother or a father.
Yeah. And or just like Mike Donilon, that one will work too. But just actually, I think there was a piece this week on this as well. But go ahead, Mike Donilon. That works. I think the Wikipedia should work as well. Okay, so Mike Donilon is the top advisor to Joe Biden and has been since 1982.
Since 1982.
Yeah,
My God, give him a Medal of Honor.
I'm sorry, 1981.
Give him a bigger Medal of Honor.
Now, Mike Donilon is the head of what they call the shadow cabinet inside the White House, what they call the kitchen cabinet, the small coterie. Mike Donilon has been the top political groomer of Joe Biden's political career for 44 years.
You're saying these are the people who are really running the country, effectively.
Mike Donilon is Tom Donilon's brother.
Right.
So the guy who is the top advisor to the President of the United States and is at every single one of these meetings, knowing exactly what the U.S. government is going to do through the Central Intelligence Agency, through the Defense Department, through the State Department, through USAID, in order to take over a region, destabilize a region, overthrow a government, roil the currency markets, acquire these oil and gas, exploit this copper and aluminum, this policy on lithium, this policy that's going to impact portfolio companies operating in shipping and freighting and mining, oil and gas, weapons manufacturing. This is the craziest insider trading setup you could possibly imagine.
Yep.
The number one guy at the advisory role of the White House, who's been the political groomer of the U.S. president for 44 years, his brother is running the investment arm of BlackRock. And this also, I mean, BlackRock is also who cleared Joe Biden in 2019 to run for president. You can read a New York Times.
They what to him?
Joe Biden hesitated before running for president. If you remember, he waited a long time. People ruled it out after a certain time because he had waited so long. And I believe it was in January 2019 when he came to New York and met with Larry Fink. And once he secured Larry Fink's green light, as I believe according to the New York Times, who
green
wrote this,
light?
yes, basically when BlackRock, he was indecisive on the fence. Met with Larry Fink. Larry Fink said, "Yeah, you should run. We'll back you." That's when Biden threw his hat in the race, and then lo and behold, the Obama's number one cabinet official goes over to run BlackRock's in-house think tank, and they're profiteering off of all of these policies. They're the ones, leading Ukraine reconstruction because they can bet on the Biden administration taking hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money, and as well as bribing, threatening, cajoling, coercing the entire country of Ukraine to sell off all of its strategic assets to these BlackRock portfolio companies. You can just look up, Ukraine strategic asset sale, Ukraine selling itself off to Western companies. So, what I'm saying is on getting back to the structuring side of this, that was done through so USAID is going away, but there will still be. We're right now in a fight over the budget, the annual budget fight, which is really the moment that Congress is most powerful, because Congress has power over the purse, and the executive branch can set the policies of the DOD, the State Department, the DOJ, the FBI. But if they've got no money, they've got no operations. It's like saying you're allowed to, operate your body any way you want. But if someone's got a button where they can shut off your blood supply, at the end of the day, they control your body. And that is the power of Congress. And Congress does not want to codify these DOJ cuts. Again, I don't know if this is fully accurate. The news reporting I saw was that only something like $9 billion of DOJ cuts are included in the current budget, which I think is just 5.4% of the waste, fraud, and abuse that DOJ identified and recommended for cuts. Now, a lot of those funds were paused. They were contracts were terminated, but they can simply be put in a new bill, and then they're right back. And
the bills are this thick, so no one even knows it's in there. Right.
And every member of Congress, because the issue is they're not really throwing a bone. They are with $1 trillion Pentagon budget, which is a whole other.
I was
shit
gonna
sandwich.
say we're missing trillions of dollars here. So when we really talk about balancing the budget, like how is it even a realistic conversation when there's like a whole bunch of it that we would need to balance that's missing that we don't even know where it is?
Yeah. I mean, some estimates say
21.
I mean, there was an article in the Street in 2020 which said that there was a $35 trillion Pentagon black hole budget. You want to put that on screen? It's just a
Well,
funny
that is
visual.
from Jim Cramer, so the inverse sometimes is right.
Yeah, and you'll see.
That's our one hope.
You'll see. There's a privatization. There's a sell-off. But yeah, just type in the Street or Yahoo Finance also published this Pentagon $35 trillion black hole.
Black hole.
Yes. This is so at the time in 2020, the national debt was less than 35 trillion. So,
Yep, there it is. The Pentagon. You weren't kidding. Pentagon's 35 trillion accounting black hole.
So by
Yahoo
that
Finance.
math, the Pentagon had lost more money than the entire U.S. national debt. Just the Pentagon, and like literally, the national debt crisis could be over if we could just find the money the Pentagon lost.
Joe, this is the great society, bro. This is what we talk about. It is. Oh my god.
Where's the money, Lebowski? Where's the money, Pentagon?
It's like the South Park episode, and it's gone.
Right.
It's all gone.
Right. Well, this one's quite a doozy. But
You want to go down?
it's okay. And the point that I'm getting at here is we're giving the Pentagon more money than it's ever gotten before. I think it's right now around $900 billion, and we're giving it $1 trillion. I mean, the fundamental point I was getting at is Congress does not want to pass these cuts because money for their donors, money for their constituent districts or states comes in significant part from these grants and contracts. If you are in Northern Virginia and your district is weapons manufacturers, or if you are in the Midwest and you're multinational corporations who are dependent, are big agriculture companies, and they want take over the agriculture markets in Latin America or Ukraine, which is a big bread basket, or Syria, you want the battering ram of the U.S. government to take that market for you.
Right.
And so you have a lot of Republicans who are, I think there was 26 folks in Congress on the Republican side who are, as last I counted, it was that were saying they were not going to codify the Doge cuts. And that is too big a margin to overcome. If they abstain or vote with Democrats, then this will fail. And the issue is, can you create enough of an inducement to these folks? Because right now, all you're doing is taking away, and you're taking away in the interests of the country. Mm-hmm. And if they were moral people, if they were motivated by what's best for the country, then they should do the right thing. The issue is they have, I'm sure, some affinity. I don't think that all of them are entirely self-interested, stereotype caricatures of evil politicians. I think a lot of it is a fight for their own political lives. And this is part of the unseemly part of the restructuring of this. It's sort of like, if someone is a hardcore addicted to heroin, the withdrawal symptoms can be so severe that people can, in extreme cases, can die of the withdrawal symptoms if they're that hooked on it. That's why you have these kind of intermittent drug therapies, like, you put them on methadone, and then they go clean from there. You sort of give them another bad drug that's less bad as you're weaning them towards being clean.
That's right.
And what it takes to become not just a member of Congress, but to move up the ladder through the committees, into senior leadership positions, into a whip position, into a speaker or Senate Majority Leader position. You are building favors with the blob the whole time. That's how you rise up through the ranks. You are building up favors within contacts at the agencies. You're building up favors within major donor networks. You're building up favors with major folks in New York at the hedge fund and private equity fund layer. You're building up favors within the military industrial complex. You're building up favors with the folks in the Chamber of Commerce. And there's something more. There's a bigger issue than just corruption in Washington that we're dealing with here, which is the corruption of the lower Jenga blocks of what even created the American empire in the first place. And when the USAID stuff happened, and I put out some videos and did some media, everyone was expecting when they had me on for me to be doing jumping jacks and cartwheels and touchdown dances when USAID closed. And I think especially right in the beginning, my tone was somber on it and braced and trying to say, okay, this is the right diagnosis, but you have to understand if this is not done right, how is it that, and I give this analogy a lot just because it's funny, but, Pizza Hut got 200 million new customers or whatever when the CIA and the State Department and USAID destabilized the Soviet Union. And I've played this before, but look up the Gorbachev ad. Look up the Gorbachev Pizza Hut ad. Just go to, I think it's on YouTube, just Gorbachev Pizza Hut.
Did they plan that for Pizza Hut? Like, is it that sick that they planned it specifically?
Mikhail Gorbachev participated in this Pizza Hut ad where literally Russians are talking to each other saying, well, Russia's corrupt, it's corrupt, this privatization, isn't working, but, we have Pizza Hut. And because the Soviet Union, when it became a free and independent market system in Russia, now Pizza Hut could penetrate its markets. Look up the Pepsi coups in Latin America. Read Private Empire and how ExxonMobil got to where it was. Everything that makes America great is ironically built on the corruption of this system. ExxonMobil did not necessarily win by being the best, most cost-efficient oil company. ExxonMobil wins because the U.S. military goes in and invades Iraq and funds ISIS to take over Syria, and moves into fields in Mexico and strikes favorable deals with Canada and blows up things like the Nord Stream pipeline in Ukraine so that Exxon and Chevron's LNG serve as Europe's markets. It's the same thing with every multinational corporation. Mm-hmm. It's whether, and we don't need to, everyone can look this up if they want. If we're low on time, we don't need to,
we're good.
Go on it. But, it is just a funny ad, the Gorbachev one, because, it's all the way down to Pizza Hut. Like literally, Pizza Hut is profiteering off of the Central Intelligence Agency running tens of millions of dollars in black duffel bags to the solidarity movement of striking union workers in Poland so that the solidarity movement's Lech Walesa can topple the communist government there and install market capitalism. And now Pizza Hut has customers there. It's the same thing. I mean, this whole thing, there's a really interesting, evolutionary story to this in terms of how its lobbying arm came about at the end of the Cold War to continue all this. But another great example of this is the Pepsi, is the overthrow of Allende and there's an article in the Guardian. If you look up Pepsi, Allende, Allende. And you can go into the National Security Archives and look up the declassified documents on this.
Extreme option overthrow Allende.
Well, yeah, but if you read the Guardian article on this, it's going to be a little bit easier. If you just type in the Guardian.
All right. So add
You
the
know, or no, I
Guardian,
would just say, yes, Pepsi, yeah,
the Guardian.
yeah, there you go.
A Marxist threat to cola sales. That one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is
1998.
no. This was relating to 1970, 1971.
Right, but the article's from
Oh, yeah.
1998.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
well,
go-
if
go
you-
back to that,
go
Joe.
back to that.
Go back to that.
Yeah, and you can just X out of the ad or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna so it is a firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown by a coup. Please review all your present and possibly new activities to include propaganda, black operations, surfacing of intelligence or disinformation, personal contacts, or anything else your imagination can conjure. For eyes only, restricted handling, secret message to U.S. Station Chief Santiago from CIA headquarters, October 1970. And what you'll see here is, and if you scroll down, you can look at, you just kind of peruse it as I talk about it. But, and I have all the documents on this on my X account as well. So, the head of Pepsi, Don Kendall, he was the CEO and chairman, was concerned that Allende's in Chile, Pepsi had major bottling operations in Chile. And there was a concern that if Allende were to, be in power in Chile, going through with this nationalization would crush Pepsi's bottling operations. And so, Pepsi, Richard Nixon was a Pepsi lawyer. Interestingly, Kim Cheadle, the head of Secret Service, who allowed the shot on Donald Trump at the Butler rally in Pennsylvania last
she was
year.
head of security
She was
for
head
Pepsi.
of global security for Pepsi.
You don't say.
Well, the whole thing goes to there's a lot of...
It was a sloped roof, Mike. Come on. It was so sloped. You can't get up there.
Well, there's another very dirty side of Coke and Pepsi, and why it is that Coke and Pepsi work so closely with the CIA. Because what you'll see here is the head of Pepsi, the CEO chairman, reaches out to Henry Kissinger, and
Great guy.
And Kissinger sets up a direct meeting between Richard Helms, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the head of Pepsi to jointly coordinate the overthrow of the Chilean government. This is a personal meeting. You'll actually see the meeting minutes of this in the National Security Archives. They brought in a third guy into the meeting, which was the CIA's media guy in Chile. The
media guy.
Yeah.
They had a media guy.
Yeah, for media propaganda operations, yes. So the three of them worked out, the plan. Allende was ultimately overthrown in a coup. But, this is a personal meeting between the head of Pepsi and the head of the Central Intelligence Agency to overthrow a foreign government secretly. You're a Chilean citizen. You see people on the streets, drug gangs, marauding around with, U.S. origin machine guns and murdering your friends and family. You have no fucking idea that Pepsi and the Central Intelligence Agency are behind this, liberation movement in your country. But what I'm saying is...
I'm sorry, Chile. I don't approve.
Is every major company works with the Blob to get this done, and this is part of how U.S. companies run the world.
Yeah, I've seen you give clips talking about the Blob, but for people out there who aren't familiar, can you just define exactly what that is?
The Blob was the technical term from President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes. So we just talked about Tom Donilon, the National Security Advisor, so that's his deputy, effectively.
Guy who wrote the Iran deal.
Yeah, exactly. And Bill Burns was the lead negotiator from the State Department. He then became the head of the CIA. And so the Obama administration was frustrated that it could not get a significant chunk of its foreign policy done because there was a foreign policy establishment in Washington, an international affairs branch of the U.S. government that seemed to be more powerful than the White House itself. So now a lot of conservatives are like, Obama was a tyrant, he was a dictator. But here you have the closest inner circle of the White House publicly saying, because Ben Rhodes did talks about this, media hits about this. This is his term, not mine, the Blob, saying that they felt impotent in many respects because this permanent monster inside of Washington that comprised the foreign policy establishment was more powerful than the White House itself. And the Blob obviously refers to this movie in the 1950s of this big purple gelatinous, alien monster that descends on small town America and is always growing in size, gobbling up. It blobs over a car and it just absorbs it. It blobs over a house and it just absorbs it, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And no one can tell what this thing is. All they see is this giant purple gelatinous blob. And but it is a thing. It is a blob. It is a giant purple gelatinous thing. And then there are trees and houses. Like, it is an actual object, but it comprises all these other things inside it. And he was referring to the foreign policy establishment, which is a term that is deceptively narrow.
Narrow.
Well, if I say foreign policy establishment to your audience, they're probably halfway asleep before I finish the C in policy. Like, the fuck do I care about foreign policy, right? Like, I care about is my food cheap? Are my streets safe?
Yeah.
Does the music bang? Like, I don't care about can I get a
But it's
can I get a girl?
downstream.
Right, because people don't understand. People here in America, we see the American homeland, and we don't see the American empire.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see what's happening in Kazakhstan and how important the rare earths are there. Milton Friedman has this video I talk about a lot about the pencil. Milton Friedman was this big libertarian economic theoretician whose theories kind of they're the basis of the sort of Chicago School of Economics and this free market, free enterprise, Reaganite philosophical underpinning for that also is sort of codified now in U.S. law with how all corporations work. You have a legal obligation as a member of the D&O. If you're a director and officer of a publicly traded company, you have a fiduciary duty to maximize total shareholder value.
That's right.
And this is built on this Milton Friedman concept that what's good for the company is good for the world. And, if that's why you have cheap products, is because of the free market, baby. That's why you have competition and innovation and so get the government out of it, get every other concern, everything else will trickle down from there. Just maximize total shareholder value. And this places nation states in a very precarious situation because if maximizing total shareholder value means outsourcing your labor to India, outsourcing your manufacturing to China, inking partnership deals with Vietnamese sweatshops and corrupt Congolese mining companies for your resources. If you are required by law to effectively destroy your own country's competitive position, you are driving a death spiral of the United States empire, or at least of the United States homeland, as the companies of the empire, the extremities, the long arms of it get rich, but the core of it gets sick and its blood dries up.
To meet a quarterly report.
Yes, right, exactly. But Milton Friedman, and I get a lot of flack about this because, a lot of people are like, yeah, DC corruption sucks. Yeah, fuck USAID. No, don't touch Milton Friedman. No, like don't, no, please, not that. And look, I learned a lot from Milton Friedman as a kid. I watched all 10 DVDs of Free to Choose, and I think he's a very eloquent spokesperson, and a lot of the ideas are useful, but it is what got us in this mess. And there are left-wing critiques of Milton Friedman that were ignored by the conservative world that are now coming back to bite conservatives as they're having to actually learn a lot of these left-wing critiques. And this has happened on a lot of fronts. And I think this is how you get Bobby Kennedy and Nicole Shanahan, and a bunch of folks. Tulsi Gabbard, who's now the director of national intelligence, was a Democrat a couple of years ago. There is this a meta supra political phenomenon of populism versus globalism, and anyway, I bring this back to say that Milton Friedman gives this, and it's on YouTube as a video about the pencil, and he's talking about the magic of the free market. That no one person can make this pencil. The wood is chopped down in trees in the Amazon, and the gum comes from the gum trees in Malaysia, and the graphite comes from these mines in Argentina, and so the issue is what happens. And this is the magic of the free market, because they're all motivated by the price system, and so this is how you are able to buy this wonderful utensil for just pennies, even though no person on earth could make it. And this thing would, if you tried to make it, it would cost you $1 million to travel to this country and hire a mining firm to mine the graphite and process it, and then travel to this country. But the fact is it's not the magic of the market that made that pencil. It's the magic of the blob. What happens?
The magic of the blob.
Yes. You go to some South American country and you mine their graphite. What if Bolivia wants to make Bolivia great again, and they want control over the graphite mines? And they say, we'll allow you to have this graphite, but there's going to be a forced mandatory rev share where it's going to cost you, there's going to be a 50%. The people who sit on this land are going to get 50% of all of your proceeds. You're going to have access to this graphite mine, but the government of Bolivia is going to get 50% of all of those profits. Meanwhile, that U.S. pencil company is competing against other manufacturers who might have a cheaper deal. You need a coercive mechanism in order to persuade the Bolivian government that they should allow the market to work, shall we say.
This is a free market.
I'm saying the magic of the blob is what allows the magic of the market to even happen. There's something above Milton Friedmanism. And take another example. What if the government of Bolivia will allow U.S. companies to exploit their own graphite resources, but the laborers, the miners themselves, are getting paid, just pennies, and they're making millions of dollars for a foreign company, and they go on strike and say, okay, we're not going to actually mine unless we get more money from the company to do it. But that would make it prohibitively expensive for the U.S. company to compete with other pencil manufacturers in order to do it. You need a mechanism to go into that country to not just persuade their government, shall we say, which could involve anything from the State Department fighting for the pencil company, the same way they fight for Pepsi Cola, the same way they fight for Microsoft and Apple, the same way they fight for ExxonMobil and Chevron. You might need, if that government's unreceptive, you might need to send in the CIA to do covert action within there. You might need to send in USAID to start paying these people to support the action or to put down strikes. And this is how you see so much USAID money flowing to union groups and to these trade labor associations. You need a mechanism to affect every layer of the political economy in a foreign country so that U.S. companies can profit maximally, I'll say, from that. In order for U.S. companies...
Security guards. Yeah.
Yeah. So, security guards...
Ex-Navy SEAL security guards.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, bribery, because this is what USAID is just bribes. That's what, at the end of the day, you're paying people
so
that
I'm
they
just
do
using
what you
a symbol, by the way.
Right,
Yeah, not literally.
But what I mean is, so I talk about how corrupt this whole thing is because it is dirty and it has gotten so bloated that our own infrastructure is falling apart. We're like in the 30s or 40s right now on the world stage in terms of education. Our heartland turned into a rust belt. I drove, when I moved from D.C. to Florida, and I drove down 95, the premier interstate highway, it looks like crap. You go to, our capital cities are dirty. D.C. is a homeless den. As our infrastructure is collapsing, we're spending the treasury that could be used to focus on ourselves, to focus on thousands and thousands of operations in foreign, distant countries for multinational companies who aren't even hiring Americans or don't even have their factories and plants here, aren't even, no part of the economy is trickling down.
And it allows them to increase that wealth gap, by the way, because there's fewer winners.
And then it also gives them a bigger war chest to buy more politicians with. And so the point that I'm getting here is I feel like I have two hats on, because one is to drive and expose and publicize and crusade about the extent and scale of the corruption sufficient to get policies passed, accomplished, coalition built, so that people are motivated to do it. But on the other side, to selectively, I don't want to say hit the brakes, but to selectively caution around the anatomy of the thing you're operating on. Because when I say the problem is bigger than corruption in Washington, it's actually this corruptive dark side of the force that I hate to use a Star Wars analogy, but just I'm committed. I'm committed now.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, please.
There's that scene. I don't know, was it Return of the Jedi or something, where they're arguing about Yoda and Luke are arguing about which side of the force is stronger. The light side, because the dark side of the force seems so much stronger than the light side of the force, and then it becomes clear, I think, in the fights that the dark side of the force is stronger than the light. And it's not until like Luke gets super angry and looks like he's on the dark side of the force himself that he even beats Darth Vader. I bring that up to say that, like, to build the American empire, which is the stage on which this blob craft operates in Washington, this international affairs, the American empire that stretches beyond the American homeland. It was built on this dark side of the force all the way back at the beginning. We did not become an international empire until 1898 with the Spanish-American War. That's when we took Cuba and the Philippines and became an international empire.
Through foreign policy, you're saying? Because economically, you could say maybe during the Industrial Revolution, having started post-Civil War, we got there. Is that fair?
But we were already operating in Latin America. We were doing the banana wars and the guava wars and the pine. I mean, United Fruit was moving into Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and installing, banana republics under the barrel of the U.S. Department of War gun. This relationship between big business, it was big sugar, then big oil, now big tech. All these major industries of the U.S. always had this blob component of it. That was how we became the global power. We were not the global power in the early 1800s. It was still a battle between England and France and Spain and Portugal, and we built the America that we consider great. And this is I'm in a tough place talking about this, because I try to be nonpartisan, bipartisan. I was a political appointee of the Trump administration. I would, if there was and I'm a Republican voter, I would feel at home working for a Democrat who was aligned on this. For example, if Tulsi Gabbard had kept her Democrat Party affiliation, I don't see things in that like red team, blue team paradigm this way. It's, do I agree with your policies? And I agree with Donald Trump's policies. I don't agree with, the John McCain, Mitt Romney, side of things. I don't know that they're. But the point that I'm getting at is this structure is what built the great in what in what MAGA thinks of as "Make America Great Again," and the sensitivity in talking to like conservative audiences about this is you start sounding like Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, sort of, I'm not saying this from the socialist critique is what I'm saying. I'm not promoting socialism, communism.
People are always, Mike, people are always going to twist your words, man. Like, you're out there crusading for something larger than yourself. You've obviously done a great job on it so far. Fuck them. Like say it how it is. People know where, people who are not idiot commenters know where you stand on things. And for you to be able to disagree with something that was well-intentioned and point out where it has flaws, you should fucking be able to do that.
Yeah. And look, and I'm comfortable for it. I'm just sort of hedging and prefacing so that when I say what I'm about to say, people see it through the lens that I see it in. But it's that, the whole Trump movement, Make America Great Again, the G in MAGA harkened back to this concept of American greatness as the world leader in, China overtook the U.S. as the biggest trading partner to Europe a couple of years ago. Even Europe, on almost every measure, China is beating the U.S. In terms of economics, influence. I remember when I got to the State Department running the cyber portfolio, and one of the multilateral organizations under my purview was the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, which is the oldest multilateral forum in the world. It dates, it's pre-United Nations, all that stuff, and it was set up in when the international telegraph technology in the 1950s. We had to have a coordinating forum, so that telegraphs could line up, when they travel across, cables, continent to continent. But today it's sort of the big telecom intergovernmental body. And I remember getting briefed by my deputies at the time on the status and key issues. And the main concern, we inherited at the time when I was there, the head of it was Chinese, not Chinese American, Chinese representing China. All 40 countries in the African Union voted in a block with China. Mm-hmm. China had majority support. The U.S. was in a defensive posture, trying to play stalemate on key issues, not even so much playing to win, because that wasn't even possible because countries were aligned. This was quite a shocking thing, because you go in thinking, okay, this is international relations. America's the best. America, and you go in and you're okay. No, actually, we need a coalition build on this. We need to make these compromises on this. We're going to lose on this because China's got the leverage. China's got hand. And so what I'm getting at here is you have this international competition that's playing out, and you have this corruption we're trying to solve here. And I think when the sort of left-wing Marxist critique of the structure that I'm talking about is it's imperialism, right? It's American imperialism, and that is not the lens that I see this through. I am pro-empire. I want what's best but only to the extent that it helps the homeland. I want America's influence to be strong. I am not anti-imperialist in that sense. I'm anti-corruption, but I'm pro-homeland. The issue is there's a schism between the interests of the empire and the interests of the homeland, because you have an empire managerial class, and that's what the blob really is in Washington, whether through the State Department, the CIA, the DOD, USAID, or through folks in the lobbying world, in the multinational corporations and hedge fund private equity world, who want to influence the policies of the empire managers to maximize their profits, often at the expense of the homeland. And so I want the homeland to be great. And to do that, though, like imagine a world where all of the corruption, if you describe this whole structure that I'm talking about as corrupt, the coups for Pepsi, coups for Pizza Hut, coups for Exxon, coups for pencil companies. We fund transgender dance festivals. If the State Department's field work in a country, when it does a baseline assessment of the cleavage points in a society who are opposed to a government we want to overthrow, we call them baseline assessments. We'll do a demographic assessment, which will include what do all the ethnic groups in the country think about the government that we want. If we want to overthrow a government, we need to get critical mass of its population to destabilize it, take to the streets, and install a new government that'll be more favorable for our interests.
Which also takes less than we usually would think. Like like someone like me would think. My friend David Satter talks about all the time how the Soviet Union was overthrown with effectively 15% of their society.
Yeah,
it can happen fast.
Well, when it doesn't require a vote,
That helps.
No, but that's absolutely true. And they all know this all has spillover effects. Michael McFaul, who is the U.S. ambassador to Russia for the Obama administration, is a major, Russiagate figure. He's currently at the Stanford.
I've seen him on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, he was a big academic scholar of how to overthrow countries from the inside. He wrote like hundreds of papers on the how to. There's a very famous one, which was a 7-step guide to how to orchestrate a color revolution successfully. And one of the key components, I think it's number 4 or 5, is destabilizing street protests that are semi-terroristic, effectively. Where they're technically they call them nonviolent protests, but it's mob violence is what it is. What they call it nonviolent because it doesn't involve tanks and napalm. It just involves Molotov cocktails and setting buildings on fire. That's what they call nonviolent action. But he gives examples in this famous blueprint that he wrote about how, I think it was in Georgia, or may have been 2004. I think it was in Georgia. He gives some Eastern European country, and he gives the example about how they created this quick reaction force to allege there was election fraud, even though it was kind of unclear who actually won. But they got enough mobs in the streets that were mob violent, nonviolent, mob violent, and that the threat. The size of these riots were so terrorizing to the population that the judges felt that they had to rule, that they had to adjudicate in favor of the mob in terms of the determination by the judicial body. For example, in Romania, it was a judicial body who canceled the elections. It's a judicial body who's banned Marine Le Pen from running in France, a judicial body who's banned Bolsonaro from
by
running
a judge,
in
the mob. Yeah.
Right. And we have, and they call them EMBs, election management bodies. This is the State Department term for who you influenced in order to
that doesn't sound suspicious at all.
I can tell you about that, but our EMB here would be the Supreme Court of the United States. But so oftentimes, well, that's who decided Bush v. Gore.
Yeah, it's just when you say it out loud, it's like, damn.
Yeah, well. There is a recycling machine between the U.S. Supreme Court and USAID's top global influence operation for influencing the decisions of courts and prosecutors and judges around the world. It's called the World Justice Project. Oh. It's funded by USAID and the State Department. And they have a worldwide network of judges and prosecutors in 80 countries, 100 countries, thousands and thousands of top prosecutors and judges who all move through this World Justice Project network. They have a whole database, actually, at the U.S. Institute of Peace with this. And on the board of the World Justice Project are 4 recent Supreme Court justices.
Oh my God!
It's I mean, Chief Justice John Roberts, current Chief Justice John Roberts, traveled to the Czech Republic when Norm Eisen, who's the legal hatchet man, who's been behind it he's the top blob lawyer for all things Trump lawfare, wrote the book trying Trump and prosecuting Trump, and he was behind the impeachment trials. He was behind the criminal indictments. I think
Norm Eisen, you said?
Yeah, Norm Eisen. Yeah. I can. It's a whole other thing to get into. A lot of people don't know this about it. I actually wrote together with Darren Beattie. I wrote this piece. If you look up in Revolver, Norm Eisen, legal hatchet man, I wrote about this. I was actually the first person to write about this. This is 5 years ago. Yeah. Well, yeah. So, but it's in revolver.news. But if you just type in Revolver News, Norm Eisen, legal hatchet man is 2 words. But I can tell you about it. The link is there in Revolver if you want to search for it. But no worries.
The first one, the case for locking up.
Yeah, meet Norm Eisen, that one.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is a piece that I put out in Revolver together with this is Darren Beattie's outlet in 5 years ago, and this became a major news story. This was covered on Fox and everywhere.
All right, scroll down.
If I have a paragraph here that's got a bunch. If you scroll, I think it's right below this picture. You'll see. Here you go. So I mean, just as so he drafted 10 articles of impeachment a month before Trump even called the Ukraine president. Remember, Trump was impeached over Ukraine.
Oh yeah, when he was like something about Burisma or something like that.
Yeah. This was already, so before that even happened, this guy had already written 10 articles of impeachment for it. He was the Senate brought him in as special counsel to help litigate this. He runs Crew and a bunch of these other lawfare shops in order to do this. But you'll see what right below here. He wrote this whole playbook on how to overthrow governments using street mobs. This is a sample street mob here.
Oh yeah, look, his name's right at the top.
Yep, and this is he does this as an annual report. Actually, it's published out of Brookings. Brookings is.
I love how they market this. This is beautiful marketing right here.
Yeah.
Instead of overthrowing a government, you put it in nice like aqua blue text and you say the democracy playbook. Preventing and reversing democratic backsliding. Who can disagree with that? I can't disagree with that.
Right. But you got to fit in the box, right? You got to fit in the threat to democracy box. But Norm Eisen, a lot of people don't know this about him. They think of him as a corrupt lawyer. And they have no idea he slithered out of the blob just like all of them. He was the U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic. He was the head of the State Department for the Czech Republic. And the thing he said he was most proud of was his work on so-called rule of law in the Czech Republic. And this is another one of these blob catchphrases that everyone should be able to pierce right through. That rule of law means legal bullshit. It means legal tricks and legal bullshit to take out your political opposition. So what Norm Eisen was doing was running these rule of law programs to get rid of the U.S. State Department, the Barack Obama State Department's political enemies in the Czech Republic. This is something that the State Department and USAID have been doing for 40 years now, paying groups like the American Bar Association, who accredits our law schools and gets special access through the Justice Department for vetting all judicial employees. They are a CIA task force to descend on the courts, the prosecutors, to lean on them about how they should rule in cases, what laws they should pass, what laws they should prevent. If Parliament passes, they should rule as being anti-constitutional. The same thing that's happening right now in our country as all these executive actions are being blocked by our courts. This is exactly what our blob structure does through its rule of law programs. But I bring this up to say that John Roberts, while he was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, traveled in 2000, 2013, I think it was, 2012, 2013, twice to Norm Eisen's 150-room mansion in the Czech Republic. It's a
150
palace.
rooms.
Yes. Now this is the State Department's.
What is this,
mansion.
fucking Buckingham? 150 rooms?
Yeah.
I've never even heard of that.
Publicly reported. You can look up Norm Eisen Palace, 150 rooms. But the head of the Supreme Court, the sitting acting head of the U.S. Supreme Court, travels to meet with Norm Eisen directly for an entire week, spends an entire week with Norm Eisen to work on so-called U.S. and European rule of law issues. I mean, what they're doing is they're developing constitutional predicates to get rid of the State Department's political enemies. And like I said, they all recycle straight into this machine. If you look up the World Justice Project's board of advisors, or I think it's their board of advisors. And who else is on the board of advisors with them? It's like the CEO of British Petroleum. And it's all the multinational corporations who want the laws tilted in those countries for their own interests. If you look at the board of advisors, you'll see all the Supreme Court folks. And what the World Justice Project does is, with our taxpayer money, State Department and USAID money, if you scroll down, just board of advisors.
It's a who's who.
You're still in the directors, I think, or you can just Google search the board of advisors.
Oh, that's board of directors.
Yeah. And so they go, for example, they went down to Brazil because the State Department wanted to take out Bolsonaro. Or you can just type in Supreme Court, Justice Supreme Court. You'll see it all there. I have all the links and stuff on my X account too, if it's easier to search that way. If you type in World Justice Project.
Yeah, if we can find it, we will. If not, everyone will go to your Twitter. That link is in the description below. Follow them there.
Mm-hmm. And they leaned on the courts and the prosecutors to go after Bolsonaro in Brazil. They leaned on them in Romania. They are justice is not blind. Justice lifts its blindfold to see what the blob wants. And this is how people move up in the U.S. court system and, to become judges. And this is how you have U.S. statecraft leaning on foreign countries about who their judges and prosecutors should be. If you remember, Joe Biden personally traveled to Ukraine while Hunter Biden's on the board of Burisma and it's being investigated by Viktor Shokin, their top prosecutor. And he threatens them with withholding $1 billion USAID grant if they don't fire their prosecutor and replace it with someone who would not investigate Burisma, who would not investigate the corruption. It was a USAID grant that they threatened them with. And lo and behold, son of a bee, as he said, they did it. They fired the prosecutor. So, but what the meta point that I'm driving at is there's corruption in Washington because there's corruption in how we make our bread in the first place. Imagine an America that did not have an ExxonMobil, did not have a Walmart, did not have a Pizza Hut, did not have, you don't want to be that country.
That's right.
And it's dirty work. And this is where it's tough because people get so animated when they see the corruption that I talk about that they want pitchforks. And I try to say, listen, okay, it's good that you're animated, but you have to channel it productively because. And then, people will say, oh, you're being you want to keep the corruption.
You're controlled opposition.
You're telling us about all this corruption. You're saying you want to keep it. I'm saying, no. I want what's politically achievable. And you need to tailor this or else you're going to run into the same fucking problem we're now running into. I said minute one when USAID was announced, and I made a video on this, and I said, it's all going to come down to the annual budget fight, though. It's all going to come down to the annual budget fight, though. And now people see, oh, my God, they're not codifying the Doge cuts. How could they do this? And I said, yeah. Anyone who's thought this through could see this coming. You have to understand the totality of the system, and you need to be able to talk about it in a level way. Good, bad, and ugly, warts and all. You have to be able to simultaneously understand and hate and want to chop out the corruption, but understand the role that corruption plays. Because, for example, You hate China too. You want to win the war with China, not the Chinese people or whatever. You hate the communist Chinese government, whatever you want to say on that. Okay. We just overthrew the government of Syria. We funded their narco networks. We pumped them full of drug money. We pumped them full of USAID money. We secretly funded them in the largest CIA operation known to man, Operation Timber Sycamore. You had Jake Sullivan telling Hillary Clinton, per the WikiLeaks email, that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. They are our force. You had an ISIS group that Turkey was mad at, that the U.S. military got them to change their name to the Syrian Democratic Forces so that they would no longer be seen as ISIS. I have this video on my X account too, which is hilarious if you want to watch that.
The Syrian Democratic Forces
for
the caliphate of...
But wait, pause right there. Okay. So this is the World Justice Department Board of Advisors.
We were trying to pull up, yeah. Madeline Albright.
That was the Secretary of State for Bill Clinton.
Yep.
James Baker,
Ruth
Secretary
Bader
of State for Bush.
Ginsburg.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Stephen Breyer. You have, let's see here.
James Baker.
Yeah, Anthony Kennedy.
Oh my God.
These are the highest Supreme Court folks on our Supreme Court, and this is a CIA operation. Okay, this is USAID. If the CIA did this and did not acknowledge it was doing it because it was as a covert action rather than as a semi-public, democracy promotion program, a country would say, oh my God, you're influencing our courts, you're influencing our judges, you're paying. The World Justice Project is literally paying the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice to implement laws for economic reforms and criminal justice prosecutions. We're literally paying for them to prosecute our enemies. We're giving them USAID money so that they have more court capacity to arrest the people the State Department wants taken out. And this is 4 Supreme Court justices on this. There's only 9 Supreme Court justices.
Right.
But the point that I'm getting at here is okay, with Syria. And if you look up Syrian Democratic Forces on my X page, you'll see this. Or if you look up maybe the phrase rebrand or rebranding, or just look at Syria until you see this video. It's just very funny. But so yeah, here you go.
Is this it?
Yeah.
Let me get some volume on this, Thief. Here we go. All right, now you got it. Go for it.
As sometimes it's of necessity, who's available. The one that I think is most discussed and most misunderstood is the evolution with our counterpart in Syria, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, interestingly, they came about that name because at one point in time, and I dealt with them directly, I was on the formative stage of the relationship with these guys. They formerly called themselves the YPG, who the Turks would say equated to the PKK. You're dealing with a terrorist enemy of mine. How can you do that, ally? So we literally played back to them, hey, you got to change your brand. What do you want to call yourself besides the YPG? And with about a day's notice, they declared that they were the Syrian Democratic Forces. I thought it was a stroke of brilliance to put democracy in there somewhere. As sometimes it's of necessity, who's available. The one...
In a day.
Oh my God.
In a day. 1 day later. Get out terrorism-free card, put democracy in your name.
Democracy.
Right. Now, we were so all up in funding the terrorists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, in Syria. Look up the Los Angeles Times article, CIA paramilitaries fight Pentagon paramilitaries in Syria.
CIA,
Pentagon.
paramilitary, Pentagon.
Syria. Yeah, go ahead.
That should do it. And Syria militias armed by the Pentagon.
Yeah, just click that, yeah. Okay.
And Syria militias armed by the Pentagon fight those armed by the CIA.
This is how all up in the grill of terrorism we were. We were literally funding so many different terrorist groups that some of our terrorist groups were fighting each other's.
Oh, yeah, there were 1 million in Syria.
Yes,
if you ever look at that map.
Right,
nuts.
Right. Now, the same name change happened with Muhammad al-Jawlani. Al-Jawlani was
Who's now in charge.
Yes, his resume, 2000, 2003 to 2006 to 2013, ISIS, 2013 to 2019, Al Qaeda.
Lakers and Celtics, baby. Let's go.
Right.
Let's go.
And his resume right now is, president of Syria. And we just took the sanctions off. Now, and he changed his name as soon as he.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
I didn't even see that.
Yes. Yeah.
Can we pull up Jelani's LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Let's see what he's done here.
As soon as he took power, he changed his name.
I'm kidding, obviously.
He should have changed it to something with democracy in it.
Yeah, that's right.
Ahmed,
Just throw
democracy. Right. And now,
Abu al Democracia. There you go.
I'm going to tell you a story that's going to be fucking crazy here in a second.
You're crazier than what you've been telling me?
Dude, this one's insane. This one is a really clean example of what we're up against, like how deep this thing goes.
Keep that mic pointed towards you.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
You're good. So, but I guess while you're pulling up the Al-Jelani,
How Abu Muhammad al-Jelani reinvented himself. This is from the BBC. All right, go down.
Yeah,
Joe.
yes, and he changed his name.
Syrian rebel leader Abu Muhammad al-Jelani has dropped that nom de guerre associated with his jihadist past. He's renounced it.
Yeah,
so he's
for
good in our book.
for the first time, we learn his real name. Now
just show that picture of him, Joe. He looks trustworthy.
Now
look at him. Come on.
Now
look at that face.
Just pause right there for a second.
Okay.
Trump wanted to wipe out ISIS. Wipe out ISIS, wipe out Al Qaeda. That was a big foreign policy goal in the region. And so the U.S. State Department designated Mohammed al-Jelani as part of HTS. He was declared to be a terrorist leader, and the State Department put a $10 million bounty on his head.
That's right.
And that was an active URL as of 2 months ago. Like, literally still on the State Department's site. And now we have lifted sanctions on Syria, and as part of the agreement, actually, when Jelani came to meet with Trump a week before that, he announced that if the U.S. would pledge sanctions relief, the new Syrian government will use AT&T instead of Huawei, and it will partner with Chevron as opposed to companies like Rosneft for its oil. That it would partner with U.S. companies for the agriculture. So, there's 40 million people or so in Syria, or 25 million, something like that.
It's a key location, though, too.
Right, but what I'm saying is AT&T just got 25 million new customers. Mm-hmm. Because of the State Department dropping sanctions and the War Department giving ISIS weapons and USAID growing the opium for, literally, look this up as well if you want.
John Kiriakou literally broke this on my show back in October, and I had no idea. And then when you started talking about the USAID stuff a few months ago, I was like, holy shit, wait a minute. John was telling me about this.
USAID grew the opium. They irrigated and the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is the State Department adjunct that had a semi-military showdown with the Trump admin with loaded weapons inside the building, and I'll go through this in a second, but I was just going to say there's a Breitbart article that reports on what the government agency, like Inspector General, was doing. Yeah, there you go.
First one,
yeah,
Fed's U.S. taxpayer fund. Fed's U.S. taxpayer funds helping irrigate, fertilize Afghan opium funding Taliban.
Yeah, so basically the USAID was funding the cultivation of the poppy. And then if you go to my X account, because I assume that U.S. Institute of Peace has now purged its website and everything 404s, and rather than going into the archive, if you just type in U.S. Institute of Peace, you'll see what on my X account.
I also want to say, Mike, This is Joe Deef's first time in the saddle today,
Dude,
and
you're
he's
killing it.
fucking killing
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Like,
So-
holy shit.
So, U.S. Institute of Peace was created by Congress in 1984, right when Reagan was reorganizing the intelligence community to create all these quasi-government agency CIA fronts like the National Endowment for Democracy and the U.S. Institute of Peace. And here's what the U.S. Institute of Peace wrote in 2023, when the Taliban was taking power again. Taliban's successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world. So understand, U.S. Institute of Peace is...
Oh, look at the first tweet right there down below. Look at that on the right.
Oh,
There's John doing it. And I'm like, fuck.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
So this is the U.S. government. The U.S. Institute of Peace gets $54 million a year from the U.S. State Department. It's located right next to the State Department. It exists to serve the U.S. State Department. It is overseen directly by the State Department as well as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. This is created by the government, funded by the government, directed by the government, and they are openly telling the Taliban, while USAID, their immediate funding counterpart, is growing the opium, they are telling the Taliban, do not shut down the opium.
Right.
Because, of course, the Taliban tried to shut down the opium in 2000. The opium is what funded the Mujahideen when they were the CIA's army in the 1980s.
Yes.
And when the Taliban tried to get rid of the opium in 2000 and reduced opium output by 99%, the U.S. militarily invaded and then made it the largest opium zone in the entire world, all under U.S. military occupation, and then telling them, keep the drugs flowing because it'll have negative economic consequences. Now, the U.S. Institute of Peace, Trump tried to shut this down. The U.S. Institute of Peace is a 15-person board. By statute, they are required to have the Secretary of State on their board, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of Defense on their board, Pete Hegseth, as well as the President of the National Defense University. Yeah, peace, by the way. It's all military and
Peace through strength. Come on, Mike.
right. And then there are 12. And then there are 12 political appointments by every new administration that get Senate approved. So when Trump tried to execute that statutory authority, the U.S. Institute of Peace barricaded the building. It's a beautiful building. It's one of the most beautiful buildings in all of Washington, actually, I think. And so they barricaded the doors. They deleted 1 terabyte worth of financial data, including funds directly to Taliban officials, as the Doge folks have pointed out. So while they're telling the Taliban, keep the drugs flowing, keep creating illegal narcotics, they're also paying the people, in senior leadership there, or who are officials in the Taliban structure, and they're also operating a giant influence operation within Afghanistan and Syria. U.S. Institute of Peace creates networks of NGOs, civil society organizations. They create links with different tribal groups, with different paramilitary groups. They operate as a sort of civil society front for CIA work. They're sort of like they do hearts and minds work with a NGO face. Rather than walking in there with a, W-2, tax ID, hi, I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. You go in there because you're doing that work. You're doing covert influence in conflict zones with terrorist groups. I mean, Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and you are, moving them for the purpose of what the State Department and CIA are doing in the region. Again, at that time, Syria was... That was the largest known CIA operation to date. Now, I believe the Ukraine one, when those figures come out, will far dwarf that. But that case, currently, the U.S. Institute of Peace, so again, they barricaded the doors. The FBI had to break in. They found guns in the building. They found, they found, again, like the finances where they tried to delete them so that the Trump government couldn't see what they were spending money on. So then what ends up happening is they try to use lawfare to stop the transfer of power. They argue, well, we're not technically a government agency, even though we're funded by it, and they're even though government documents, if literally, I think it's on like USA.gov, they like list them as a government agency, but so they get one of these blob judges who's actually on the board of one of these sister entities was on the board of one of these U.S. Institute of Peace sister entities, this Center for Democracy and Technology, Beryl Howe. She rules Trump cannot go through with this shutdown. He cannot do this unilaterally. They need to go through this whole process. So U.S. Institute of Peace could not be shut down by the Trump government. And who was the lawyer for U.S. Institute of Peace who filed that action? Well, in this case, it was actually a guy named George Foote, who has been the lawyer, their top outside lawyer since 1986. This organization has only been around since 1984. So this guy's been the keeper of secrets for this organization for 40 friggin' years.
Yeah.
As they've been working with the drug networks, working with these, terrorist networks. And this is you can imagine that causes a lot of problems for lawyers. So he's the one, yeah. So he's the one who filed this lawsuit and has stopped the Trump administration from the shutdown. Now, if you go down to his resume, you'll see, what does he do other than,
the
just stop right there.
mitigation of violent international conflict. He's a mitigator.
No, so he's been their top lawyer here for 40 years. But what does he do on the side? Well, as counsel to the Wireless Industry Trade Association.
Oh my God!
So
it's right there in front of you.
This guy represents AT&T, and he is, as U.S. Institute of Peace, is working with narco networks, Islamic terrorist groups to overthrow the Assad government with a pre-pledge from the new terrorist, literal ISIS, literal Al-Qaeda guy, pre-pledging that if they get rid of sanctions, AT&T will get all of the wireless contracts. So it's at both ends.
Yeah.
They're creating these networks with terrorists and drugs to overthrow countries, and then they are working directly representing the U.S. companies who will immediately profiteer from us pumping up the international drug trade. 95% of Europe's opium comes from Afghanistan. It is the narco capital of planet Earth. And U.S. Institute of Peace is saying, thank God Almighty, and don't you dare touch one poppy seed field. And USAID keep irrigating it.
Because they want to get the people of Russia and Iran, and I haven't heard John Kiriakou say this, but possibly also China addicted to it. I'm not saying I approve of that. I'm saying that's the logic.
Maybe. It doesn't even need to be, though. It's money. It's money for mercenaries.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's of course on the other end. I'm saying that's how they justify it to themselves.
Right. But in this case, those drugs paid the army that got AT&T the contract. Those drugs paid the army that got Chevron the contracts. Those drugs paid the mercenary, the terrorists who were getting U.S. big ag companies to take over Syria's breadbasket. And you look at that and you go, that is so corrupt. And then you also look at it and you go, okay, these are U.S. companies. What happens if you don't have an apparatus like this at all? Like in this case, it's gross.
Yes.
I think this is
I agree.
Inexcusable. This is of the category of totally rogue. Like you're simultaneously waging war on drugs while your government is pumping up the world's largest drug zone.
100%, I agree.
You're waging a war on terrorism, and that's how we explain $1 trillion Pentagon budget, because we're sending our boys to fight the Pentagon
and work with them.
But the Pentagon is funding the people that we're sending our boys to fight. But what I'm saying is the corruption in D.C. is not a product of D.C. It goes back to the what actually made America powerful. Because at the end of the day, we are the sum composite of all of our multinational corporations, our hedge funds, our private equity funds, our infrastructure firms, our construction firms, our Halliburtons, our Walmarts, and as you are trying to spoon out the corruption, you have vital organs there, which is that you want the U.S. economy to be maximally powerful. You want U.S. companies to be maximally powerful. You want U.S. financial firms to be maximally powerful vis-a-vis their competitors internationally. You don't want to be a second or third world country that does not have, Portugal used to be a very powerful empire. Can you name gun to your head, name the most significant Portuguese company?
No.
Huawei, China is powerful because they have companies like Huawei and Alibaba, and they have a huge amount of wealth that comes from their national champions they have Chinese mining firms that moved into, moved into Africa and, for all of that.
Over.
It's a corporate beachhead for all of that. And like the larger point I'm trying to get at is, in order to get the kind of solutions that are politically palatable, you need to come at this metaphorically, if you will, with enough of a pitchfork in the hand in terms of anger about the corruption, but enough of a scalpel on the other hand.
That's it.
To offer a value proposition to members of Congress of an alternative way. And that's the part of it that I don't yet see that's being comprehensively spoken about in the way that it needs to.
You're talking about equilibrium, which is
Yes.
literally what the law of physics says the universe is supposed to operate on, but we are living in a world where we have gotten an action that is so far in this way that naturally the reaction is burn it all down. And you are sitting here as the guy saying, oh my God, this action's crazy, but please, for the love of God, instead of going here with the pendulum, can we get it here?
Right.
And that, I love that. And that's that. Like if you can do all these podcasts and go on these shows and get that message across, and people can like step back for a second, take a deep breath, understand a lot of evil has happened. It's horrible. You're exposing it, doing a great job. But there's a way to be reasonable to fix this, such that the homeland can be good and the American empire can prosper without fucking torturing people around the world. Then that would be a W.
Yeah. No, exactly.
You ever seen The Wire?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a scene that's been sticking in my head all day while you talk. It's just like playing in the background, and I think it's such a perfect metaphor for what you're saying. You've been cooking today. It's really been incredible, so thanks for doing this. But, in the second season, they are prosecuting – I actually forget who they're prosecuting, but someone in the drug trade in Baltimore. The Wire takes place in Baltimore in the early 2000s, and it's one of the greatest shows ever made. But the lawyer who represents all the gangsters is cross-examining Omar Little, who is an incredible character played by Michael Kenneth Williams. Rest in peace.
The game is the game.
That's right. The lawyer's there. He's kind of the stereotypical like hatchet job guy. And he's like, so you are a vigilante, Mr. Little. Is that correct? And he goes, that's correct. And he goes, so you run around making the laws, deciding to do whatever you do. He goes, just like you. Yeah. And the guy turns around like all shocked, like, and he goes, I got the gun. You got the briefcase. Yeah. It's all in the game, though. Yeah. And every time I think about it, because that show is like one of the greatest microcosms of like the dark side and underbelly of American society and the bastardization of the American dream. Every time I think about that, I'm like, that's true across the board to the highest levels, and you have pointed out every example of it today. All these, lawyers with their fucking 12 degrees that we pull up, or these Supreme Court justices or whatever, they're not carrying a fucking Kalashnikov. Maybe they probably don't even carry their own briefcase, but that's what they got.
Well, George Foote here is, is the lawyer, and Muhammad Al-Jilani is Marlon.
Marlo Stanfield.
Marlo, yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean, he's like, the end scene where he's, going to the party. It's like the final scene of
He's like, do it or don't.
Yeah.
I got places to be.
Right. But, he's putting on a suit for the first time.
Yeah.
It's like Mohammed Jelani's putting on a suit for the first time when he goes to France. He meets with Trump, and it's like, 2 months ago you were flying around with an ISIS flag, and but yeah,
it's crazy to me that all of this is also right in front of us too. You've just done an amazing job, like digging on and everything, but I do want to go back to something we talked about early on, because you might have changed my opinion, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of nuance there. You were talking about how the State Department is higher than CIA, and you referred to like CIA's example with the Furio example. And there's something I think could be true there, in the sense that you're 100% correct that like being Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State is, I mean, like on the LinkedIn game of life, that's a higher standard than being, the clout, if you will.
No one ever goes the opposite direction.
Right, exactly. So that could make you think, therefore, those departments are higher. But here's the one other, I guess, devil's advocate to that. If you referred to the CIA as like the soldiers, let's stay with your mob example. I love that. Above the soldiers, you have the captains, the capos, and above them you have the boss, the underboss, and the consigliere. So the boss is the president, the underboss is the vice president, the consigliere, maybe it's the chief of staff, but for lack of a better issue. All the capos, the captains, are the cabinet members, like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and the high ones you talked about. I've never heard of a mob war, though, where the soldiers, without support of any captains, were able to take over the family from the boss. And the CIA, even though the CIA director, I completely agree, is a less clout-worthy in the Instagram game of life position than Secretary of State, for example, the CIA, the organization itself, is the keeper of the secrets. And you can throw the NSA into this, the DIA, all the intelligence apparatus. They, as an organization, may actually be more powerful than the people who run the sexy parts. Do you think that I have an okay argument there, or would you still disagree?
Yeah, I think there's something there. I see it in a different paradigm, but I think they come together through just the concept of factionalism within the agencies.
Factionalism?
Yeah, there's rival factions, right? So Trump is the head of the CIA right now, right? I mean, he's the head of the executive branch. The CIA answers to, is the part of the executive branch. They answer to the White House National Security Council. They answer to the White House. They have to do what the president wants to say. I would say probably 95% of the CIA disagrees with Trump's foreign policy vision on a whole range of issues, but especially around Eurasia and Russia. Bipartisan, dyed-in-the-wool, sees Eurasia at CIA as well as at state. The Republicans wanted to take over Russia and the $75 trillion worth of natural resources that it sits on. The Republicans want to do that. The Democrats wanted to do that. So there's a bipartisan consensus within the intelligence community. And Trump defeated both a Bush and a Clinton in 2016 to do that. He took out the two big powers to do that. Didn't have any friends on the inside. Had to start from scratch. So there's some people in there who I think are maybe ideologically neutral, if not aligned. But because CIA operates in such a compartmentalized way,
yes,
even though it answers to state, it has to get State Department approval, has to serve State Department goals. Different factions within the State Department the CIA can be used as a way to subvert senior leadership at state by rival factions within state. Like you might have, for example, you got Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State. Then you have all the different bureaus. You're going to have like Victoria Nuland, for example.
She's a beauty.
Right. But what was her role during the Maidan in 2014? She was the Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasian Affairs. Now, Assistant Secretary, you have Secretary, Undersecretary level, actually Secretary, Deputy Secretary, then the Undersecretary level, and then the Assistant Secretary level. She was at the fourth layer down, fourth layer removed, which is it's very senior relative to the tens of thousands of people in the Foreign Service at every layer of the State Department. But it was just one level above where I was Deputy Assistant Secretary. She was Assistant Secretary. She was not ultimately a hugely senior, like she was not even Under Secretary. When she was seen as the angel of death, toppling government after government across Eastern Europe. And then she got promoted during the Biden administration to being Under Secretary for Political Affairs. Now, in 1961, Arthur Schlesinger, the White House senior advisor to JFK, wrote, this just came out, the fully unredacted version just came out 2.5 months ago, and the title of it was called CIA Reorganization. This is, I believe, June 1961. CIA Reorganization, Arthur Schlesinger. And he talked about what you just identified, which is that even though CIA was supposed to serve state, CIA was usurping State Department jurisdiction in certain key respects. And if you scroll down, is this the 2025? Okay. If you scroll down to paragraph 3 or section 3, if you should see, go to 3.
Right.
Go to 3. It should be called Controlled American Sources. No, wait, scroll up a little bit.
Operations and policy was 3.
Scroll up a little bit.
Doctrine is 2.
Wait. It's 15 pages, so it might be a little bit below. But it was called Control. One more page. There it is. Controlled American Sources. Okay. So what he describes here is Controlled American Sources. This you'll see this refers to CIA folks operating under State Department cover.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So a lot of people accuse me of being in the CIA. Because,
they do? I've never heard this.
Yeah, because they say, okay, you say you're at the State Department, and what did you really do there? Because it's so common for CIA folks to claim that they're working for the State Department. It's called diplomatic cover.
Yes.
And you'll see this is in 1961. The CIA was just a newborn baby. It was only 13 years old at this point. And here's what Schlesinger writes. Controlled American Sources represent a particular aspect of CIA's encroachment on State Department policy functions. CIA today has nearly as many people under official cover overseas as the State Department has overseas. 3,900 to 3,700.
In 1961.
Yes, right. Right. So scroll down. It says, originally the use of State Department cover for CIA personnel was supposed to be strictly limited and temporary. The Dulles-Jackson report stated in 1948, the CIA, says again, when the CIA was born, the CIA should not use State Department cover as a simple answer to all its problems, but should proceed to develop its own outside cover, and eventually in this way, through increased efficiency of its overseas personnel, find a way to temper its demands on the State Department. Because the State Department has to perpetuate the CIA's lies, but when it puts people undercover that way.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, the CIA has steadily increased its requisitions for official cover. There are several reasons why they do it, he goes over. Then it says, in some missions, I understand, CIA folks under State Department cover outnumber regular State Department personnel. In the U.S. Embassy in Vienna, out of 20 persons listed in the political section of the State Department, 16 of the 20. So, 80% of the entire division at the State Department is not even at the State Department. That's right. They're lying publicly. They're listed as being in the State Department, but they're CIA. And then it goes on to say, in Chile, 11 out of 13 in the political section are actually CIA. In the Paris embassy, there's 128 CIA people secretly working CIA. The CIA in Paris it goes on to say 10 out of the 12 folks in the political section at the State Department are actually secretly CIA. It says CIA has even sought to monopolize contact with certain French political personalities, among them the President of the National Assembly, their version of Congress. CIA this is at the time, by the way, that we were trying to coup Charles de Gaulle and,
Wait, I don't even know about that. We tried to coup Charles de Gaulle?
Oh, brother.
He's looking at me like, oh, my friend, how long we got?
Oh, brother. But I want to finish this point here.
Mike, they're coming for you right now. I don't know if you can hear that outside.
Wait, let me finish my point.
Please, yes.
Yeah, my call is not going to be to my lawyer. It's going to be to your podcast audience. All right. So this is one way, for example, that CIA and state can butt in this power struggle, because State Department has contacts, CIA has contacts. Those points of contact, they'll be getting different messages from those different contacts. Civil society leaders in the country, political leaders. This is the head of the French Parliament. The State Department, the embassy is saying CIA is giving them direction and not letting us actually give direction. So they're directing the French Parliament what to do. And then it says, if you scroll up a little bit, CIA occupies the top floor of the Paris embassy, a fact well known locally. So the top floor of it, which is typically senior leadership, is actually all occupied by CIA. And if you scroll down and...
So they effectively Captain Phillips the whole fucking State Department by 1961.
But understand this. You just read here. And by the way, this is exactly... This is 1961. J. Michael Springman reported the exact same thing in the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in the run-up to 9/11, where he said he was shocked when he got to the consulate. 75% of the people at the State Department consulate were not actually working for the State Department. He said this is 1995. That 75% of them were actually CIA, including his boss. He was the head of the visa section. That same consulate, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, that was where 15 of the 19 hijackers for 9/11 got their visas, and he wrote this book, Visas for Terrorists, about how he was fired for not giving visas to terrorists. And he was saying that meanwhile the whole time, I think I'm at a State Department consulate, but 75% of the staff there are secretly they're under diplomatic cover. They're actually working for the Central Intelligence Agency, including his own boss, who's overriding him. And by the way, the head of the CIA station at the time was John Brennan, who would go on to be CIA director. Yeah. This is who was issuing visas for the 9/11 hijackers.
Why is he always in the middle of, like, not great stuff? It's always Brennan.
But notice this in particular. The most egregious takeover at the State Department by CIA was in the political affairs section. You just saw those numbers, 80%, 90%, 75%, embassy after embassy. Victoria Nuland, when she was promoted by Biden, what was she promoted to? She went from Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasian Affairs to Undersecretary for Political Affairs. She came to run the entire political section. And while she's also on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA's top NGO cutout, what I'm saying is I don't know that I would call that a power struggle between the State Department and CIA. This is a State Department network that has the CIA at its at its disposal. So I come back to factionalism to say that she was not CIA under Biden.
Yeah.
She was the head of the State Department, which controls which the CIA's political division answers to. But she's got all her CIA people who don't need to report to the State Department people there because it's all at the senior leadership level. And so if, Victoria Nuland goes back a long, long ways in terms of her role in NATO expansion and all the Council on Foreign Relations shit, at the end of the Cold War, and moving through all the neocon networks and then into the neoliberal networks. And if she represents an asset to this class that has an agenda that is agnostic about who's present, Republican, Democrat. She worked under. I don't consider her a hardcore left winger. I consider her a John McCain person. She's a
neocon type almost in a way.
Right, but Joe Biden, the Democrat president, put her in charge of the entire political affairs of the State Department, which is the major CIA front for State Department work. But what I'm saying is the Undersecretary for Political Affairs can circumvent the political agenda of the Secretary of State by working with nodes within the CIA that can hyper-compartmentalize things, not submit certain things for review, falsify evidence, leave things out, put critical documents under prohibited access where they won't show up in a database for State Department folks to be able to check. They can play shell games. And so one faction of the State Department, I come back to this Thummy War thing. You have this entrenched blob class at state. Then you have a new president who gets in and says, do my foreign policy agenda. This is what the people elected me to do. And they say, we don't want to. And they're wrestling it out. And the president starts winning. So they go, oh, you know what? Well, we have this thing. We have this big network. And they don't have to tell nobody shit except us. So we're going to end run it.
There it is.
And this is exactly what you saw. I mean, you look at the direct quotes. I think the quote was, quote, we were constantly playing shell games with the numbers. If you look about, the military activity, I believe it was in Syria and Iraq. These were Trump's own generals came out after he lost in 2020, bragging that they lied to Trump about the paramilitary activity that they
said this publicly?
Yeah. Look up the quote. We were constantly playing shell games with the numbers.
Oh, there it is. We were constantly playing shell games to make clear to our leadership how many troops we had there. Jeffrey said in an interview, the actual number of troops in northeast Syria is a lot more than the roughly 200 troops Trump initially agreed to leave there in 2019. And that's from retiring diplomat Jim Jeffrey.
Okay, and again, that's the State Department. And who was spearheading that? The Central Intelligence Agency. It was. Do you understand what I'm saying? The CIA was running Operation Timber Sycamore, the largest CIA operation, and the State Department is bragging in Syria and this because he wanted to wipe out ISIS. So the State Department, the entrenched diplomat class there, did not want to go through with the new State Department agenda from the Trump politicals. So we were always playing shell games to not make clear to our leadership. So because they can use their different bureaus, subdivisions, cells within CIA to keep stuff super compartmentalized, need to know, eyes only, informal, they could run their own, effectively, State Department policy vision independent of the president by having the CIA carry out that foreign policy clandestinely rather than the U.S. democratically elected president carry out the foreign policy that the people voted for. So in that sense, I still see it as that sort of Sopranos metaphor, but different capos can use Furio to try to kill Tony.
Yes, now it makes sense. Yeah. And and really what you're talking about is the jerseys kind of come off and they morph together. It's not really separate teams in a way.
Right.
But then you can look at the sexy roles and say, but there's still a pecking order there as far as like what you strive for and what seems to have more power and more being known on the global stage, which also makes sense because if you're head of CIA, you're the head of a spy organization. Your job is to be more in the shadows. Yes, you're the public guy who talks sometimes, but you're not out there shaking hands with every diplomat in the world all the time like the Secretary of State is or Secretary of Defense or something like that. So that does make sense. But we did get off the Doge thing, and it's kind of important to touch it today because Elon apparently stepped aside yesterday. Now, I do want to say, I love the idea of Doge. Loved it. I didn't love the optics of technically the richest guy in America running it. I admire him wanting to do that, though, and I appreciate him doing that. But, what does this mean now that he's not going to be there, and what does this look like? And, do you have any inside information you're able to share publicly about how this is going to eventually, shake out?
Yeah, not inside information. I've been fortunate that I think a lot of what I've published has helped guide action there, but it's not like I don't know more than anybody else about the inside machinery in terms of what's currently going on. My sense is that the role Elon is transitioning to will be similar to the one that he had in the first 2 weeks similar to the role that Trump had in the Trump transition period, and maybe the first 2 weeks of Doge's existence before he moved there, slept on a couch, had the world's tiniest office for the world's richest man, and where he's going to, I think, going to be a part-time advisor who's got issues that he's passionate about, and will provide sort of policy insight. The Doge function will continue until July 4th, 2026. So Doge is not dead by any stretch. It's still got another year to it. And the Doge infrastructure has been established. Every federal agency has a Doge guy, and they are still working to identify waste, fraud, abuse. Their presence was unbelievably powerful at governing. I've heard so many stories personally from people, inside the State Department, inside USAID, inside other places, who've talked about Doge being a game changer because their ability to actually cut to the chase of the money is what moved the bureaucracy more than anything else. The credible threat to get to cut the funds, and I think that's what helped achieve a lot of the policy victories of the Trump administration, was the enforcement arm of Doge behind it. There's a lot of ways to interpret what's currently going on in terms of Elon's transition back to a primary focus on his 6 different multi-billion-dollar companies that he runs. This is obviously coming as several things have just recently happened that were all quite significant. Obviously, this is coming quickly after first of all, he's scheduled for this. He's a special government employee, which is only 130 days. Mm-hmm. So, he's literally following the exact process. Right. This is not a resigning or quitting thing. This is literally just 130 days running out. At the same time, I wanted to print out this tweet and get it framed as, and not even knowing exactly what it means, other than it must mean something, which is that someone tweeted last week that Doge was one of the most important government initiatives in modern history, and that the American people betrayed Elon Musk. Congress betrayed Elon Musk by not codifying the Doge cuts, and only codifying in the bill such a tiny little pittance of it after all of that work, and lays all this out in this very long tweet. And Elon replied to it with 3 words: "Tried my best." And I love Elon. I think he is a great man of history in a way that, I remember when I first learned that term in social studies in high school. You're taught history develops because of systems and institutions, and and this complex tapestry of and then this competing theory that actually history is just a series of great men imposing their will, and the systems and institutions and incentive structures and all of that are just downstream of every generation. A couple of great men impose their will, and then the institutions and incentives wrap around that. And he put it all on the line. I think that he saved the world from 1,000 years of darkness. He did what people only talk about in theories, and then when they're actually under the gun and under the pressure, never have the balls to do. And I think to see him say, I don't think Elon ever quits anything that he cares about. That's so when I see "tried my best," I don't see I'm hanging up the jersey and trying Major League Baseball for a couple seasons, like Michael Jordan style. I think it's a combination of things, which and again now I'm just speculating, which is that I think that it does appear, and I don't know this, but it appears that there was some disenchantment towards the latter stages of Doge. I don't know exactly what gave rise to it. I don't know if there were policy differences beyond just Doge. But I think that there was, and this is where it's like, there have been so many positive things about it that what I've been trying to do on the censorship side, I think has only been made possible by Doge. All the grants and contracts to censorship organizations that we got cut at State Department, USAID, National Science Foundation, DARPA, the DOD writ large, there's NIH too. There's so many. There's like 12 different government agencies that I think this action has only been made possible because of Doge escalating these things, including some of the worst NGOs in the federal government. But the fact is I think it's just about ROI. Again, speculating. I think it's about ROI. What Elon said in a recent talk was that, looking back at it, he thinks that he may have misallocated the time proportion that he spent on government work versus private sector work, because there's so much to do with Tesla, there's so much to do with SpaceX, there's so much to do with X, and his vision is, I think, ultimately to mold the course of humanity per the vision of goodness that he wants the world to look like, and that's maybe a different vision of goodness than other people have. I agree overwhelmingly with the vision that he's laid out, but regardless, I think that both in the private sector work that he's doing and in the government work, it is driven by a sense of trying to leave a world after him that is better than the one that he inherited, and trying to solve crisis events, everything related to debt, to economy, to population degrowth, to interplanetary space travel, to freedom of speech, and all these things at every layer were under total crisis, and many of them remain under total crisis. But I think that he thinks that's better achieved right now by, for example, taking this period to, everything has its season, to spend this season on Tesla and SpaceX and X. And I would be shocked if there were not sequels to this movie. He's surprisingly young for what he's...
it's wild. Yeah, you'd think he's like 85 years old at this point. He's not.
Right, with all the lives that he's lived.
Yep.
So, in my heart, I'd like to think that he is reloading rather than retreating. And, the thing that, the other little dagger is, when you see that did my best, is that you have a lot of these folks like Norm Eisen, this legal hatchet man who was a part of all these, coup and lawfare crafting. He was recently on doing touchdown dances about Elon's departure, and effectively claiming credit for driving him out by fomenting the attacks on Tesla as a business. And the fact that they were able to temporarily really drive down the Tesla stock price and try to stigmatize the company as it's trying to also roll out full self-driving auto taxis in large Democrat cities. You're going to have full self-driving Teslas in Austin while the entire, leftist city believes they have a, Soros patriotic duty to light those auto taxis on fire.
Mike, it all felt on purpose. It all felt like they wanted to make him an enemy. They did everything they could to piss him off to no end by doing things that made no sense, where he would, like you said, where he's literally trying to offer the company to help with them, and they'd be like, no, fuck you, and not even mention him.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about that. I can't wrap my head around it.
You mean the Biden admin on that?
Of course.
Well, I think a lot of that is about the unions. The unions, Tesla is not unionized and has fought off unionization attempts, and the unions are such a big part of the Democrat power base.
And then so many of the unions voted for Trump in the election, which is fairly interesting.
Yeah, well, that might be one of the reasons that there weren't riots this time around. I mean, not even joking. I mean, the unions are such a rent-a-riot arm of the Blob that the biggest union in the country, the AFL-CIO, used to be called by leftists the AFL-CIA because its international branch was always being used by the CIA to organize riots and street protests when we wanted to. I mean, that was what the Solidarity movement was in Poland. It was the union movement. We did the same thing in Belarus. We did the same thing in France. We did the same thing in Georgia. We do this everywhere. We have a whole center called the Solidarity Center at NED to copy the CIA playbook from Poland and bring that around the world. But then it was the AFL-CIO who led the 2020 protests and had a secret agreement with the Chamber of Commerce in case Trump won in 2020.
We're gonna be here all fucking night and then
Anyway.
tomorrow. Jesus.
Yeah, but I should get rolling soon. But,
But we actually have to get rolling too. I got to get deep back to Wayne. Mike, we're gonna have to do this again, man. You're like mountains of information that flow down into rivers and valleys, and like there were a million questions today that I'm like, no, I'm not stopping them. We'll keep it going. So we'll have to talk again to go through a lot of that stuff. I know people are gonna love this one. Like the work you're doing's really amazing. So
Thanks.
Hope to see you keep doing it, and everyone can follow you on Twitter. We're gonna have that link down below. You also have a YouTube channel where you've been putting up some great videos on there. So we'll put that link down below as well. And is there anything else you want us to link for you for people to catch what you're doing?
Yeah, I think just on X at Mike Ben Cyber, I post like 100 times a day. I'm like a machine on there, so that's probably the best place.
You've done some awesome podcasts on Joe Rogan, Sean Ryan, so check out all that content. It's really good
man,
stuff.
and you've got a truly authentic experience here, and it's really cool. You guys have a great vibe, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you, and MVP today, Joey D. Yeah. Shout out to Alessi for getting Deef ready to go. This was amazing. Trial by fire, pulling everything
You're catching fastballs in the catcher position there. I was like, okay.
All right, Mike. Awesome time, man. We'll do it again. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.